It was said that in the days before the North broke away, the land was held under a tenuous promise of unity. The realm was vast and diverse, ruled by a single royal bloodline that traced its lineage back hundreds of years. From the high seas in the east to the great desert in the south, from the lush midlands abundant with farmland to the windswept plains in the west, all territory answered to a single monarch seated upon a throne of ornate gold. And then, of course, there was the north, rugged, frigid, its seasons marked by long, dark winters and fleeting summers that never quite banished the chill from the air. It was a realm of snowy pines, of ice-laden crags, of cliffs battered by icy seas. Only those with a particular fortitude settled or thrived there. For generations, the people of the north gave their taxes and their loyalties to the throne far away, watching as caravans full of fish, furs, and precious minerals traveled south, never to return in equal measure. The north's riches, iron, ore, silver, and the rare dragonstones that were found only in the deep fissures of the northern mountain ranges powered the rest of the realm's prosperity, making them reliant on the north's labor. And yet those living in the southern courts, with their warm climate and tall city walls, never properly repaid this debt. They talked about the north as if it were a wild place, full of savages and beasts, a region to be feared rather than cherished. Whispers circulated in the courtly chambers, the north was too distant and too wild. But even the southerners had to begrudgingly acknowledge the north's legend of dragons. Dragons had been part of the north's mythic tapestry since time immemorial. Some claimed that dragons nested in the highest mountain peaks, their eggs buried in the snows of ages so ancient even the oldest chronicles barely spoke of them. Most who inhabited the warmer parts of the kingdom believed dragons were extinct or had never existed, just myths to frighten children into obeying their parents. A ghost story. However, in the north, belief in dragons was woven into daily life. In every fishing village, every mountain hamlet, and every fortress perched on the edge of a canyon, there were old men and women who remembered glimpses of enormous shadows crossing the moon. Some even swore they had found dragon scales as hard as steel, colored deep blue or green or a shining copper. Others told stories of hearing monstrous roars echo across the glaciers, so loud the ice trembled underfoot. When the North spoke of dragons, they spoke with reverence and devotion, for dragons were not just beasts of destruction in their tales. They were guardians of the land, representatives of untamed power, embodiments of the unbreakable northern spirit. Long ago, long before the southern monarchy had come to rule. There were rumors of pacts forged between humankind and those giant, winged beings. The alliances had crumbled or been broken, perhaps the memory of them had only lived on in lullabies. Yet the stories lingered, and in those stories lay a kernel of hope. Some believed the dragons might return if the North needed them. Some prayed for it. Some feared it. But it never really happened year after year, and so the southern lords scoffed at these fairy tales and demanded more taxes from the childish dreamers in the mountains. It was an unspoken truth that the king, enthroned far to the south in the golden capital, had grown reliant on northern minerals for the expansion of his armies and fleets. War was brewing across the sea with foreign kingdoms, and the king needed every resource he could hoard to forge weapons and bribe mercenary forces. No matter that the cost to the north was a never-ending winter of toil. He rarely sent troops to clear bandits from the trade routes, nor did he commit any portion of his navy to protect the fishing vessels of the northern coast from pirates. More and more, the north was left to fend for itself, its burdens unacknowledged. Resentment simmered on the tongues of every northerner, passed from tavern to tavern, fortress to fortress, until that resentment turned into a quiet, determined anger. A figure rose from this cold land. Ira of the Ironridge clan. She was not born high in any aristocratic tower but was of noble lineage nonetheless. The Ironridge clan had once been guardians of the mountainous passes, an ancient bloodline entrusted with the defense of the north during centuries past. Ira, tall and pale as the snowy peaks, had hair as black as midnight braided in a single plait that reached her waist. She had eyes like glacier water, clear and cold, reflecting the stark beauty of her homeland. In her youth, she had watched her mother and father break their backs paying ever-increasing tributes to the distant crown. She had watched southern soldiers pass through her lands to fight on behalf of the king in distant campaigns, none of them giving so much as a coin to the starving families left behind after the mines were taxed into destitution. When Ira came of age, she swore to fight for the North, if not to overthrow the monarchy, at least to wrest from it fairer treatment. Her chance came when the tax collectors arrived one harsh winter, demanding more gold, more iron, more of everything the North could barely spare. The local lords had refused, for the winter storms had destroyed half the harvest and the ore was buried deep under the frozen earth. The tax collectors sneered, threatened them with the king's wrath, and took from them anyway, by force if needed. But word reached Ira in her fortress home, and she gathered what warriors were loyal to her cause. They ambushed the collectors in a narrow mountain pass. Not a single official survived. Their wagons never made it to the southern roads. This act might have been dismissed as a bandit raid by the monarchy, except Ira made certain that a message was sent to the throne explaining why. "We will not bend," the missive read. "The North stands alone." She signed it with her family's sigil, an iron ridge overshadowed by the silhouette of a dragon. And so began the quiet, careful steps toward revolution. The monarchy responded at first by sending a contingent of soldiers to quell what they assumed would be a minor uprising. Those soldiers, poorly prepared for the sub-zero conditions and the swift guerrilla tactics that Ira's warriors employed, fell to the biting cold and swift arrows. The survivors limped south again, half-frozen and haunted by their defeat. In the golden capital, the king fumed at the insolence. How dare these northern folk defy him, especially while the rest of the realm faced a threat from overseas? Despite his anger, the king's generals advised that a full campaign in the north was risky. The mountainous terrain gave advantage to defenders. The only roads passable for large armies were narrow and treacherous, and the winter had only just begun. They decided on another approach. They would strangle the North's trade, blockade their ports, and wait them out, certain that by next summer the rebellious region would be on its knees, begging for mercy. They might have succeeded if not for what came next. Faced with blockaded ports and limited supplies, the Northerners struggled to feed themselves. Yet their resolve only hardened. Ira, who had proven herself a brilliant tactician in the ambushes, traveled from clan to clan, forging alliances. She spoke of independence, of a north no longer under the heel of the southern throne. Many chieftains and local lords doubted she could lead them to victory. But there was a fervor in her eyes, an unwavering determination, and an open-hearted generosity that made them listen. She swore she would rebuild the old alliances. The rumor of dragons on her family crest made some laugh. But she never laughed in turn. Instead, she declared, "If we stand as one, the old guardians will heed our call." Over the next year, the North united under a single cause in a way it never had before. Ira's lines of communication stretched across ice-locked harbors to remote fishing villages, across snowy passes to distant mining hamlets. Winter was always a time of hardship, but now it was a time of clandestine planning. Northerners told stories around their hearth fires that soared with new life. They recalled the legends of dragon riders. Some even believed that Ira might fulfill an ancient prophecy, something about a warrior who would reestablish the lost bond between dragons and men. But mostly they believed in her courage and leadership. As spring arrived and the day of the blockade's final stranglehold neared, Ira made her move. She took a small band of loyal followers deep into the frozen peaks, those great and lethal mountains that loomed beyond the safe roads where avalanches were frequent and monster-filled caverns gaped in the rock. None knew precisely what she intended. She told them only, "Wait for my sign." For 3 weeks they heard no word. The days passed in tense anticipation. Their food supplies dwindled and rumors spread that Ira had perished in the mountains. Some said she had fallen to a yeti, or been buried under an avalanche, or had simply lost her way in the endless labyrinth of icy crags. Others insisted she had been driven mad by the ghost stories of dragons and had marched to her doom. On the 22nd day, a rumbling filled the air above the northern capital of Storhelm. It was an ancient fortress city, perched on a cliff that dropped into a wild gray sea, known for the black storms that hammered the coast without mercy. Lightning flickered through a gathering thunderhead, and the wind howled. Citizens and warriors alike glanced up, peering through the gloom. Something large and dark was moving between the flashes of lightning, a shape with massive wings. A roar ripped the storm cloud in half, so deafening that it seemed to rattle the teeth of those who stood witness. And then they saw it. A gigantic dragon, its scales glinting silver in the lightning as though forged from the hearts of glaciers. On its back sat a lone figure, cloaked in a dark fur mantle, with a long braid trailing in the tempest, was Ira herself. The watchers below gasped in terror and awe as the dragon circled overhead, descending ever lower until it landed in a swirl of wind and snow outside Stormhelm's gates. Ira dismounted, meeting the wide-eyed gazes of her people. "Let the South blockade us now," she declared, her voice almost lost in the roar of the storm. Yet they heard her, and in response came a deafening cheer that echoed across the battlements. The impossible had happened. The old bond had awakened, and a true dragon, a living, breathing titan of the North's ancient lore, had answered Ira's call. Word spread rapidly that Ira had tamed, or befriended, or somehow allied with a dragon she named Carthandros. The rumor changed with every retelling. Some said she had discovered a hidden rookery in the mountains, that she had risked her life to save a clutch of eggs from marauding ice trolls, and the great dragon had rewarded her. Others believed she had recited some archaic incantation known only to the Iron Ridge line. However it happened, the result was undeniable. The North's morale soared, and Ira used it to unify her people further. When the Southern blockade's ships saw a monstrous shape in the sky, spitting plumes of ice-cold flame that froze masts and shattered them into shards, they realized the game had changed. They fled, or else were sunk to the bottom of the sea amid storms of frost. The king, upon hearing the news, scoffed. A single dragon was not enough to bring down his empire, not even if all the North had rallied behind it. He dispatched a massive army up the old King's Road, heavily armored knights and siege engines in tow. His plan was to march on Stormhelm directly, breach its ancient walls, and put this so-called Dragon Queen in chains. Ira's scouts brought word of the advancing forces, and the North braced itself. The clans had mustered every warrior they could find, but the southern armies outnumbered them 3-1. Northern morale was high, but a single dragon, no matter how fearsome, could not hold back an entire army without help. Fate smiled upon the North that year in more ways than one. Within those deep mountain caverns, Ira had glimpsed more than just one dragon. Carthandros was not alone. There were eggs, and there were other dragons slumbering in the hidden recesses of the glaciers as though waiting for a sign. Ira, with her unyielding spirit, had kindled that sign. One by one, these ancient creatures stirred from their centuries-long torpor. And one by one, they emerged, majestic and terrifying, joining Carthandros in the skies over the northern plains. The watchers below wept in mingled fear and joy to see them. Dragons of every color, though most wore the shimmering whites and silvers that blended with snow or the deep, icy blues that mirrored glacial caverns. Some belched frost fire, others exhaled lightning or conjured storms with each beat of their wings. When the southern army arrived at the foot of Stormhelm, they looked upon a battlefield that would haunt their dreams. Ranks of hardened northern warriors clad in fur and steel, standing at the city's gates, snow swirling around them, and above the battlements circled a flight of dragons, roaring defiance. The king's generals balked. The dragons unleashed a withering assault, diving in to breathe their unnatural frost flames that froze men where they stood, or conjuring shockwaves that shattered shield formations. The southern catapults and ballistae, unprepared for assault from the skies, became fodder for the relentless draconic attacks. Meanwhile, the northern infantry streamed down the slope, meeting the battered southern lines in savage close-quarters combat. By nightfall, the snow was stained red, and the southern invaders had been obliterated. Among the few survivors who fled back south, tales of the northern dragons spread like wildfire. Morale in the southern cities plummeted, and many questioned if any mortal army could withstand such a force. In the aftermath of this stunning victory, Ira stood on the battlements of Stormhelm, gazing down at her people. The banners of many northern clans flew at her side, and behind them the dragons perched like living fortresses of scale and sinew, eyes shining in the moonlight. She spoke with sorrow for the loss of life, both northern and southern, but she did not shrink from her newfound role. "No longer shall we cower," she proclaimed. "No longer will we serve a crown that does not serve us. From this day forth, the North is free." And thus was born the Dragon Kingdom of the North, where once it had been under the rule of a distant monarch, paying tribute and taxes to feed a war machine not its own. The North now turned inward to chart a new future. The clans debated how to structure their government. In the old ways, each clan was sovereign in its territory, offering fealty only when threatened by a common enemy. But Ira had proven the might of unity. The people agreed she should be their queen, though she refused the title at first. She claimed she had only done what any northerner would do. Eventually, however, she yielded to the will of her people. She became Queen Ira of the North, also called the Dragon Queen, and a new era began. In the following weeks, emissaries were sent to the Southern Throne, inviting them to acknowledge the North's independence and sign a peace treaty. But the king refused. He saw it as a personal affront that these remote mountain folk now claimed sovereignty, and he vowed to subdue them by any means. His spies told him that the dragon threat was real, that multiple dragons now roamed the skies, but he felt certain that given time he could find a way to overcome them. The southern realm was larger, richer, and had allies across the sea. The king believed that eventually might would prevail. Yet for the moment he was forced to turn his attention to pressing conflicts abroad. He needed some measure of stability in the north. Reluctantly, he agreed to a temporary truce, hoping it would buy him time to build a more specialized army equipped to deal with dragons. And so, for a short while, an uneasy peace settled over the realm. The north rejoiced in the chance to rebuild. Ira's new court at Storhelm teemed with the activity of a kingdom in its infancy. Clans sent representatives to negotiate laws, allocate resources, and plan trade routes that circumvented the southern blockade. Much of this was new to them. The north had always been decentralized, with each region fending for itself. Now they found themselves forging a shared destiny. This caused some tension, for old rivalries between clans still simmered beneath the surface, but Queen Ira moved quickly to unite them. She traveled extensively, bringing the presence of a dragon or two wherever local lords seemed resistant to her rule. That spectacle alone convinced even the most stubborn to give her fair hearing. Meanwhile, among the mountains, the dragons multiplied. Not rapidly, for their kind was slow to breed, but the eggs left in the ancient caverns began to hatch. Northern scholars tried to study them, gleaning what knowledge they could of draconic biology, but these creatures remained a mystery. It was clear, however, that their reawakening coincided with Ira's forging of a bond. Indeed, it seemed that something about her presence, or perhaps her magic, acted like a clarion call. The dragons were not mindless beasts, they exhibited intelligence and a sense of kinship with the land and its people. Some even allowed themselves to be approached by a few select humans, though none dared mount one without explicit invitation. Among the new generation of dragons was a curious fledgling named Mjorn, blue-scaled, slender, and mischievous. One day, Mjorn encountered a young stablehand who worked in Storhelm Castle. The lad, named Corin, had been delivering supplies to the dragon's roost, and Mjorn, newly able to walk and spread his small wings, trotted over to investigate. Startled, Corin dropped a bag of feed. Mjorn curiously sniffed it, giving a soft croon. Terrified at first, Corin kept still, not daring to move. Then the little dragon nuzzled his outstretched palm. Surprised by the gentleness, Corin smiled. Within days, the two became inseparable, roaming the courtyard together. The sight of a stable hand and a young dragon playing delighted the guards but worried the court advisors, who recognized that dragons were not pets. Yet for all their caution, none could deny that something extraordinary was happening, a reweaving of the ancient bond between humans and dragons, something that might one day shape the entire destiny of the North. Queen Ira, though hailed as a hero, carried a weighty burden. Each day brought new challenges. The North needed secure trade partners for vital goods. Grain and certain textiles that their frigid climate could not produce in sufficient quantity. Ira sent envoys across the northern seas, forging alliances with the coastal island nations that had long warred with the south. For the first time in centuries, Stormhelm's harbor was busy with foreign ships bearing goods in exchange for northern iron and silver. The presence of dragons overhead both alarmed and fascinated these newcomers, who reported on their experiences in letters home. Within a year, the new dragon kingdom was firmly on the map of the known world. But the southern king had not been idle. His scribes and scholars had pored over old tomes for any scrap of knowledge about dragons. His blacksmiths labored day and night to create weapons that might pierce dragon scales. War machines were built. A list of bolts fashioned from rare meteoric iron, rumored to disrupt the magical aura that surrounded dragons. The king also sought alliances of his own, promising land and titles to mercenary armies from foreign continents. If he could not crush the north alone, he would gather a coalition. But still, he waited, for the seas were uncertain and rumors of monstrous storms, perhaps conjured by the dragons themselves, buffeted trade routes. The north remained just out of his grasp. Ira's dreams were troubled. Night after night, she dreamt of dragons screaming in pain, of dark shapes looming out of the sky, wielding strange weapons that crackled with energy. She felt a sense of foreboding, a warning that the peace would not last. She shared her fears with her trusted council, a circle of clan elders, mages, and dragon keepers who studied draconic lore. They advised vigilance and caution, but Ira believed they needed more than that. She began to expand the northern defenses, ordering watchtowers and fortress outposts along every known approach to the region. She summoned skilled artisans to craft new arms and armor, lighter, designed for movement in mountainous terrain, better suited for aerial warfare. Most importantly, she oversaw the formation of an elite group, the Dragon Knights, warriors who trained side by side with dragons, forging that magical bond that had awakened in Ira. At first, very few dragons allowed humans to ride them. Carthandros was the largest and oldest, and he remained Ira's sole mount. But the younger dragons, those hatched since the awakening, were more open to forging such connections. Still, it wasn't a simple matter. Not everyone who approached them was deemed worthy. Some dragons would react violently if they sensed ill intent or if the prospective knight was not mentally strong enough to handle the bond. More than one hopeful ended up scorched, frozen, or battered by a dragon's tail. But a small handful persevered, forging links with their draconic partners in a tradition reminiscent of ancient legends. Soon, Stormhelm's courtyard saw 6 newly formed pairs of dragon knights, each unique in character and skill. It was an arduous program that tested mental fortitude as much as physical prowess. Among these new knights was a woman named Daria who had been a ranger in the northern pine forests. She was known for her remarkable stealth and skill with a bow. She bonded with a lithe, emerald-scaled dragon named Zyros who could vanish among the treetops and strike with lightning from above. Another was Gunnar, a hulking bear of a man who had worked in the iron mines all his life. His dragon partner was a massive, bronze-scaled beast named Hrondr whose breath rumbled with thunder. Their synergy in battle drills was breathtaking to watch. Gunnar would unleash a powerful ground assault, while Hrondr battered enemies from above with thunderous sonic blasts. The people of the north looked upon these knights with a mixture of pride and awe. Yet even in this time of hope, there were murmurs of dissent. Not all northerners believed in this new monarchy, however beloved Ira was. Some of the old clan chieftains resented the centralization of power, feeling their independence threatened. A few muttered that relying on dragons was a fool's path, that it was only a matter of time before the creatures grew too powerful and turned on them. Others whispered that Ira's bond with Carthandros bordered on sorcery, and sorcery was a dangerous game. The queen knew of these doubts, but she believed that unity remained their best defense. She held assemblies, listened to grievances, and worked tirelessly to ensure that each clan had a voice in the new order. Slowly, she earned their trust, though pockets of discontent lingered. After 3 years, the Dragon Kingdom of the North had matured beyond its fledgling state. Fortresses were rebuilt, farmland was improved through new techniques adapted to the cold climate, trade routes with distant nations flourished, and the flight of dragons that patrolled the skies grew in size and confidence. The monarchy was not absolute, the clan lords still held sway, but they recognized that Ira's leadership and her draconic allies were essential to maintaining their newfound freedom. Queen Ira spent her days immersed in matters of statecraft and her nights forging deeper bonds with the dragons. She had discovered that by meditating in the presence of Carthandros, she could sense the faint consciousness of other dragons across the land, a web of living magic that bound them all. This sense comforted her, reminding her that they were never alone. But her uneasy dreams continued. Sometimes she saw black-armored figures marching under a banner depicting a serpent strangled by a sword. She saw dragons roaring in anguish, pinned to the earth by spears of crackling red lightning. And once she saw her own reflection in a blade, crowned with a twisted piece of black metal instead of her silver circlet. Each vision left her shaken. She confided in the archmage of her court, an elderly man named Rowan who had studied northern runes for decades. He agreed that these dreams might be portents. Magic was returning to the north in the wake of the dragon's reawakening, and with it came the possibility of prophecy. Meanwhile, the southern king was approaching the end of his patience. The foreign war he had financed was at a stalemate, draining his coffers. His own nobles grumbled about the exorbitant taxes he imposed to fund mercenary forces. The realm's people muttered that while once their wealth was built on northern minerals, now they had lost that entire region. The king's spies whispered that the north grew stronger each day, forging alliances that undercut the south's trade networks, even competing for influence in far-flung lands. If left unchecked, the north would become a power that might one day challenge the entire southern realm. Furious at this possibility, the king announced that the so-called Dragon Kingdom must be subdued once and for all. He began mass conscription, ignoring the suffering it caused among the peasantry. He hired engineers and mages from across the sea, rumored to possess knowledge of arcane technology that might fell even dragons. Over 2 more years, a juggernaut was built, a great army with specialized anti-air weaponry and secret arcane machines that glowed with ominous red runes. By the time the southern forces marched, 5 years had passed since the North's independence. They marched with disciplined ranks, tens of thousands strong, led by heavily armored knights in black lacquered plate. A new order had emerged within the southern ranks called the Knights of the Basilisk, sworn to hunt dragons. They carried weapons rumored to be forged with runic inscriptions that could wound creatures of magic. Alongside them lumbered siege engines of a type never before seen in the realm, spiked and bristling with rotating platforms for archers. Strange crystals were embedded in their frames, occasionally crackling with arcs of red light. Observers from hidden northern outposts relayed these sights back to Storhelm, and worry spread through the land. Even a flight of dragons might falter before such contraptions. Queen Ira called a council of war. The major clan lords, the Archmage Rowan, the Draconic Keepers, and the Dragon Knights all convened. While some argued they should lure the southern army into the frozen mountains, forcing them to face avalanches and hidden ambushes, others insisted on a more direct approach. Meet them on open ground, relying on dragons and the fierce northern warrior spirit to crush their enemies. Ira listened to all sides, but her gaze traveled to Carthandros, who perched near the council chamber, quietly observing. Through their bond, she sensed the old dragon's instincts. Caution, danger, the taste of raw power in the air. The southern machines pulsed with an unsettling energy, a threat that could not be easily outmaneuvered. In the end, they decided upon a layered defense. The southern forces would be harried from the moment they crossed the border, with small, mobile units targeting supply lines, sabotage teams setting traps in mountain passes. The main northern army would gather at a strategic location that favored aerial assaults, but they would remain hidden until the right moment. The dragons would strike from above, focusing on the deadly siege engines. Meanwhile, archers and infantry would target the Basilisk Knights, whose specialized weapons posed the greatest risk to the dragons. It was a plan of necessity, one that counted on discipline and cunning to offset the southern advantage in sheer numbers and advanced war machines. The day of reckoning arrived under a leaden sky, with a cold wind sweeping the plains. The southern army crested a ridge that marked the official border between the realms, and there they encountered the first wave of northern resistance. Ranks of lightly armored skirmishers emerged from rocky cover and unleashed volleys of arrows. Then they melted away, luring the invaders forward into narrow ravines where carefully placed explosives triggered avalanches of ice and rock. Still, the southern host pushed on. Their Basilisk Knights led the charge, some wearing helms shaped like the heads of serpentine beasts, brandishing spears etched with glowing runes. The warriors of the north fell back, regrouping, bleeding but unbroken. Every mile cost the southern army dearly, but they advanced regardless, driven by their king's command and their own sense of revenge against the rebellious north. At last, the invaders emerged onto a broad plateau not far from Storhelm, a flat expanse of hard-packed snow and ice flanked by towering mountains. The wind whipped furiously. On the far side of the plateau, rows of northern warriors stood waiting, their cloaks snapping in the gale, the glint of their weapons catching faint sunlight through the clouds. Above them circled the dragons, led by Carthandros, who roared a challenge that shook snow from the peaks. The southern soldiers hesitated for just a moment, beholding the awe-inspiring sight. Then came the clarion call of their horns, and the black-armored ranks surged forward. The battle erupted in a fury of steel, magic, and draconic wrath. Carthandros and the other dragons dived on the siege engines first, unleashing torrents of elemental breath, frost fire, lightning, sonic booms. The southern machines retaliated with blasts of red arcane energy. Some dragons screeched in pain as the beams struck them, tearing through their magical defenses. One engine shot a spear that crackled with energy, impaling a young dragon who tumbled from the sky in a spiral of blood and shrieks. Cries of anguish rose from the northern lines as they watched the majestic creature crash into the earth. Furious, the other dragons retaliated, their roars echoing across the battlefield as they ripped into the siege engines with talons and teeth. On the ground, the Basilisk Knights charged in wedge formation, their dragon-slaying spears aimed upward at any dragon that dared swoop too low. Northern archers loosed volley after volley, trying to take them down. Some found chinks in their armor. Others were protected by runic wards that crackled and deflected arrows. Amid this chaos, Queen Ira led her dragon knights into battle, astride Carthandros. In a coordinated dive, they unleashed devastating attacks from above, targeting the basilisk knights directly. Daria and Zyros darted in with a flash of emerald scales. Loosing arrows that crackled with magical energy gleamed from their bond. Gunnar and Hrondr strafed lines of infantry with deafening thunder, scattering them like leaves. Yet the southern host was massive, and the battlefield teemed with foes. The specialized weapons they had crafted over years of preparation took a toll on the dragons. One by one, the siege engines toppled or burned, but not without claiming their share of draconic lives. The plateau became a scene of savage carnage. Northern infantry clashed with southern swordsmen in swirling melees. Boots skidding on ice turned red with blood. The wind carried screams and war cries. Some basilisk knights managed to wound or even slay the smaller dragons, driving their arcane spears into vulnerable spots beneath the scales. In retaliation, northern warriors swarmed them, hacking them down. Up above, Carthandros grappled with a monstrous war machine that housed a massive arcane cannon. The weapon glowed ominously, building a charge. The ancient dragon poured all his fury into an icy blast, freezing the machine's mechanisms, then tore it apart with his claws. A final detonation shattered it from within, blowing twisted shards of metal in all directions. One fragment, glowing with residual magic, tore through Carthandros' wing. With a roar of agony, he plunged from the sky, tumbling and flapping desperately. Ira clung to his neck as they crashed onto the battlefield with bone-jarring force, shattering the ice beneath them. Southern soldiers rushed forward, spears raised, to finish off the wounded dragon and the queen. But Ira was not helpless. With a swift motion, she leaped from Carthandros' shoulder, drawing her sword. It glowed with a faint blue light, forged from dragonstone in the depths of the north. She met the first wave of attackers with a fierce cry, parrying spear thrusts and slashing with lethal efficiency. The arcs of her blades sent shards of ice dancing through the air. Beside her, Carthandros spat a final stream of frost fire, incinerating a dozen more foes before collapsing from his wounds. More basilisk knights closed in, determined to claim the head of the dragon queen herself. Ira fought like a whirlwind, but the press of bodies was overwhelming. She felt a spear slice across her arm, heard Carthandros moan in pain. She was surrounded. At that moment, a thunderous roar tore through the wind. The northern line, seeing their queen and the ancient dragon in peril, surged forward in a furious counterattack, smashing into the southern flank. Daria and Gunnar led the charge with their dragons, clearing a path to Ira. In that fleeting moment of respite, Ira knelt beside Carthandros, pressing a hand to his massive jaw. She could feel his life ebbing through the bond they shared. Tears stung her eyes, and she whispered, "You must live, old friend." Their bond flared, a final pulse of magic passing between them. The dragon's eyes focused on her, then closed. Ira felt his heartbeat flutter, then sink into stillness. A terrible, searing grief tore through her, a grief that resonated across the battlefield, and all the dragons felt it, an echo of heartbreak that reverberated in their very bones. They answered that cry with wrath. The dragons still aloft descended en masse, unleashing a coordinated assault that shook the earth. The southern lines, battered and exhausted, began to waver. Their advanced war machines lay in ruins, their ranks were thinned, and though they had inflicted grievous losses, they could not stand against the united fury of the dragons and the north. The basilisk knights, with their leadership decimated, fell back. Soon the entire southern army was in retreat, stumbling away in chaotic disorder. The northern warriors chased them across the plateau, ensuring they did not regroup. The day was won, but at a dreadful cost. In the aftermath, the plateau was a graveyard of twisted machinery, fallen dragons, and the bodies of countless soldiers. Grief hung over the northern host. They had won their greatest victory, securing the north from invasion, but they had lost many beloved dragons, and among them was Carthandros, the first awakened, the ancient symbol of their rebirth. Queen Ira stood by his body, battered and bloodied, her sword tip resting in the snow. The other dragons formed a circle around their fallen elder, heads bowed. They let out a low, mournful keen that rattled through the battered shields and broken spears. Northern soldiers looked on with tears in their eyes. Felt like losing a king of their own. That evening, they bore Carthandros' body back to Stormhelm, accompanied by the entire northern army in a silent procession. At the city's gates, the people lined the streets, heads bowed as the dragons passed overhead. They had always believed Carthandros was immortal, the unstoppable herald of their independence. Reality sank in. Victory always carried a price. In the courtyard of Stormhelm, a colossal pyre was built. Ira personally lit the flames, her face streaked with sorrow, her arm bandaged from the spear wound. The funeral fire burned through the night, sending sparks spiraling into the starry sky. The other dragons roost around the city in silent vigil, their eyes reflecting the flames. For days, no songs were sung, no feasts were held. All felt the weight of their losses. Yet they also felt pride. The threat from the south had been repelled. Their independence was no longer a question, it was a fact sealed in blood and fire. Ira, newly scarred in body and soul, continued her duties. She wrote letters to the clan lords and to foreign allies, informing them of the great victory and the heavy toll it had exacted. She sent an envoy to the southern king, offering a final chance for peace. This time, she demanded that he officially recognize the North as a sovereign nation with the right to defend itself. And if he would not, she implied, the next time they came south, they would do so at the head of an unstoppable flight of dragons. Word came back within a fortnight. The southern king, battered by the fiasco of his failed invasion and facing revolt among his own nobles, grudgingly acquiesced. He signed a treaty acknowledging the independence of the Dragon Kingdom of the North, though he did so with venom in his words. He vowed in private that he would never forget this humiliation, that one day he would find a way to break the North. But for now he had no choice. His own capital seethed with unrest, and he needed to preserve what remained of his throne. Thus at last, the North was truly free. Queen Ira, though triumphant, spent many hours at Carthandros's memorial, a massive stone dais built where his funeral pyre had burned. She placed her hand on its rough surface, remembering the day she first rode him into Stormhelm, how the wind had carried them, how the hearts of her people had soared with hope. Now that hope rested on new wings, on the younger dragons that flew overhead, on the dragon knights who honed their skills each day. The old era had passed and a new one had begun. In time, Ira would be remembered as the first monarch of the Dragon Kingdom, the one who won independence through sheer will and the forging of an impossible bond. Yet the challenges facing her realm would never truly vanish. The presence of dragons changed everything. It altered the North's politics, economy, and relations with the wider world. Some kingdoms looked upon this new power with fear and envy. Traders brought stories back to their homelands of shimmering flights of dragons patrolling snow-covered skies, of a queen whose eyes seemed as old as the mountains themselves, of a people forged in ice and tempered by fire. Scholars traveled to Stormhelm, seeking to understand the draconic magic that seemed to permeate the land. Mages tested the boundaries of arcane knowledge, sometimes with disastrous results. Over the ensuing years, new alliances were made and new foes rose to challenge the North. But none could ignore the power that dwelled there among the glaciers and frozen seas. The dragons themselves grew in number and diversity. Hatchlings took to the skies each spring, to the delight and astonishment of the people who live in the fortress towns scattered across the region. The northern capital became a place of legend, overshadowed by the roosting spires where dragons perched, their roars echoing across the bay. A sense of responsibility weighed heavily upon the North. With dragons came not only the promise of protection but also the risk of devastation if those creatures were ever angered or corrupted. Queen Ira worked tirelessly to foster mutual respect between humans and dragons. She established the Draconic Accord, a set of guiding principles meant to ensure that humans never treated dragons as mere weapons and that dragons, in turn, would respect human life. The accord was overseen by a council of Dragakeepers, wise individuals who dedicated their lives to understanding draconic behavior and maintaining harmony. Corin, the stable and who had befriended young Jorn, eventually became a prominent figure among the Dragakeepers. His natural empathy and patience bridged the gap between human and dragon, and Jorn, maturing into a graceful sapphire-scaled flyer, became a symbol of friendship that transcended the boundaries of species. Their story was told in every corner of the North, a gentle counterpart to the more martial legends of the Dragon Knights. Though the winter storms raged on as they always had, the North no longer felt quite so cold. The hearts of its people burned with a new sense of purpose. Under the swirling auroras that illuminated the winter nights, minstrels sang ballads of how the North had broken away and become the Dragon Kingdom, of the queen who rode at the head of a flight of dragons to cast down the tyranny of a distant king, and of the old guardian who paid the ultimate price so that the North might be free. Children grew up with their eyes on the sky, wondering if they, too, might one day ride a dragon or at least glimpse one in flight. As time passed, historians would debate the precise moment the tide turned in the North's favor. Some said it was the ambush in the mountain pass that signaled the monarchy could be defied. Others pointed to the moment Ira and Carthandros descended on Storhelm, revealing that the Age of Dragons had returned. Or perhaps it was in the final, brutal battle on the plateau where the North sealed its independence with blood and tears. For the North's people, however, it wasn't any single event. It was the sum of their collective will, their centuries of hardship, and the unwavering belief that they deserved to guide their own destiny. They had always been bound to the land of frost and stone, and the land, and perhaps something older and deeper, had answered their call. In the silent hush before dawn, Queen Ira would sometimes climb Stormhelm's tallest tower and watch the horizon turn pink and gold over the icy sea. She would close her eyes and summon memories of soaring with Carthandros through the clouds, the rush of wind, the vastness of the sky. The bond they had shared was unlike anything she had known, complete trust, two souls intertwined. She cherished that memory as both a grief and a comfort. It reminded her that the North's triumph did not come without sacrifice, and it reminded her of the hope that still soared on dragon's wings. The war had ended, but the North's story continued. Far beyond the borders, other realms now turned their gaze northward with curiosity, respect, or envy. The Southern King brooded, ever seeking new ways to undermine the Dragon Kingdom. Adventurers journeyed to Storhelm, hoping to find fortune or pledge their swords to the new queen. Scholars studied runes in ancient ruins, suspecting that the re-emergence of dragons was part of a larger cycle of magic awakening across the world. And in the lonely heights of the frozen peaks, more slumbering eggs lay buried beneath eons of ice, waiting for some unknown day when they, too, would hatch under the watchful starlight. Yet for all these changes, life in the North carried on with its familiar rhythm, tempered by cold winds and short summers. Fishing boats still departed from cliffside villages, dwarfed by the silhouettes of dragons gliding overhead. Miners still chipped at veins of iron and silver beneath the earth, leaving offerings of thanks for the land's bounty. Children still played in the snow, building miniature dragons out of ice and giggling when real dragons swooped by. The North had gained a new name on the tongues of travelers, the Dragon Kingdom, but deep down it remained the same rugged, defiant land it had always been, inhabited by proud folk who refused to be broken. So the North endured, and so it thrived, forging a legacy that would ripple through the centuries. Its people knew that freedom was never truly secure. It had to be defended, nurtured, and reaffirmed with every generation. The bond with dragons was a gift of immeasurable power, but it also carried the weight of responsibility. And that was the core of the North's new identity, that dragons and humans stood together in mutual respect, guardians of the land they shared. The memory of Carthandros, the ancient father of them all, loomed over Stormhelm like a silent blessing, a reminder that the impossible could be achieved by those with the courage to reach for it. Every so often, when the sky was particularly clear, Ira would catch sight of a bright star or comet streaking across the heavens. She liked to think it was Carthandros, flying one last time, watching over them. The world was vast, filled with wonders and horrors, and perhaps they would see new threats arise, new mysteries to unravel. But she did not fear the future. She had faith in the unbreakable spirit of the North, in the clan lords and the dragon knights, in the stable hands and the scholars, in every soul who dared to persevere in this inhospitable land. And of course, she had faith in the dragons, who had chosen to return and share their magic with humankind, forging a destiny that belonged to them all. That was how the North broke off and became an independent dragon kingdom. Not in a single explosive moment, but through generations of quiet endurance, culminating in acts of defiance, bravery, and sacrifice. And so long as the tales were told by crackling fires on snowy nights, so long as children gazed with wonder at dragons in the sky, the memory of how it happened and why it mattered would never fade. Queen Ira awakened from a night of restless dreams to the faint glow of dawn through the tower window. The hush that accompanied the earliest hour weighed on her more than she cared to admit, for she could not shake the memory of Carthandros's pyre and the bitter cost of their great victory on the plateau. In those silent moments, even the wind seemed to hold its breath as if mourning the absence of the ancient dragon who had first carried her into Stormhelm's sky. Despite the ache in her body, she rose. Duty had already woken, and it waited for no one, not even a grieving queen. She wrapped herself in a heavy fur-lined cloak, the chill of the stone floors biting at her stockinged feet. The faint torchlight in the corridor illuminated the tapestry of Stormhelm's heritage that adorned the walls, dragon silhouettes, scenes of old battles, swirling runic motifs. All of it now felt more vivid, as though touched by new magic in the wake of the North's transformation. She passed servants who bowed respectfully, careful not to look her in the eye too long. They knew she had lost more than her greatest ally in that battle. A piece of her soul had burned on that pyre, too. Yet the North marched onward, and so did Ira. She went out onto a narrow balcony that overlooked the city. Below, the streets were already stirring. Fishmongers arranged their morning catches, blacksmiths stoked their fires, and the fortress guards traded shifts with bleary-eyed yawns. Overhead, a handful of young dragons soared in slow arcs, scanning the coastline for signs of marauding ships. Even in Stormhelm's gloom, the presence of dragons was an unmistakable reminder that they had fought and won the right to exist outside a southern king's rule. Ira reached the stables, if one could call them that, for they were no longer simple stalls for horses. Half the massive courtyard beyond had been repurposed to accommodate dragons of various sizes. The keepers did their best to keep the place orderly, though it was an ongoing challenge. Dragons liked their freedom, flying off for days at a time, roosting in remote crags, or gliding across the northern seas. Yet a few remained close, forging new bonds with the dragon knights. She spotted Daria standing near her emerald-scaled partner, Zyros. They were engaged in a morning drill, the ranger-turned-knight moving through a series of fluid sword forms while her dragon observed, occasionally issuing a low rumble of approval or correction. A few paces away, Gunnar, the ex-miner of imposing girth, stood with arms folded as he observed his own dragon, Hrondr, who tested the strength of its wings after a recent wound. The young stable and Corin hurried past, carrying a satchel of supplies from Jorn, the blue fledgling who now had grown to the size of a large warhorse. They all paused when they glimpsed the queen approach. Ira gave them a nod that bade them continue. Although the biting wind rippled her cloak and fluttered her dark braid against her shoulders, she felt warmed by their camaraderie. These knights and keepers were forging something new, a future bound to dragons, not mere beasts, but allies. The sight reminded her that hope, too, was a living thing. It was easy to forget in the gloom of morning, but she felt that spark nonetheless. From behind her strode Rowan, the archmage, leaning on his carved staff. His white hair was bound in a loose ponytail, and his gaze was as keen as ever. "Good morning, my queen," he said softly, bowing. "I trust you slept better than before?" She shook her head. "The dreams continue. I saw something. Darkness coiling in the corners of my mind. I fear it was more than a memory." Rowan exhaled, his breath curling in the cold air. "Ever since Carthandros's passing, I have sensed changes in the draconic currents. Something stirs across the world. It may be that your bond with the dragons now exposes you to dangers beyond our borders." "Dangers?" she echoed. "We have only just quelled the greatest threat to our freedom, and already a new one looms. I had hoped the cost we paid would buy lasting peace." "Peace is fragile," Rowan said, eyes shadowed with concern. "And the world is vast, especially now that magic awakens in corners we thought forever silent. I suspect it is not just us who feel the stirring." Ira folded her arms. "Are you certain that these dreams are not simply my grief?" "I watched Carthandros die in front of me, Rowan. The memory won't let go." The archmage hesitated, his wrinkles deepening. "Grief spawns many phantoms, but these dreams have the texture of prophecy. You must remain watchful." He offered no immediate solutions, and Ira had expected none. She only nodded. Together, they made their way across the courtyard. Daria paused her training to bow respectfully, and Ira seized the moment to greet the dragon knights and check on their progress. One by one, they reported. Hrondr's wing was mending, thanks to the careful ministrations of the keepers. Zyros was practicing aerial maneuvers that allowed him to vanish amid the thick pine forests. Jorn was learning to moderate his frost breath, having accidentally frozen a quarter of the stables the week before. As the knights spoke, Ira found herself smiling, though a pang accompanied each smile. She could not help but recall how Carthandros had taught her everything about dragons simply by existing. He had seemed immortal. How swiftly the illusions of permanence had been shattered. When she finished with the knights, she continued on, returning indoors through a side entrance that led deeper into Stormhelm's labyrinthine corridors. She intended to speak with the clan representatives that had arrived overnight to discuss the final terms of a new trade route with the outer islands. The North's economy depended on forging ties beyond the South, and it fell to her to ensure stability. Grievances, negotiations, and alliances still required endless hours of discussion, more so now that the North was recognized as an independent kingdom. The council chamber was warm from a blazing hearth. The clan lords, each distinct in attire and bearing, turned as she entered. Lord Farrick, tall and gaunt, wore a heavy wolfskin cloak pinned with the insignia of his mountain clan, while Lady Usrith, short and stocky, wore sealskin trimmed with fox fur. A swirl of voices greeted Ira, each representative eager to present their local concerns. Beyond them, a handful of foreign emissaries waited on benches along the wall, gold and silver pins on their cloaks marking them as delegates from the outer islands and from a distant empire to the northwest. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to mild apprehension. Ira took her seat at the head of the table and called for the meeting to begin. The morning's business dragged on with typical complexities: how best to distribute shipments of grain from the islands, the continuing reconstruction of roads damaged in the war, disputes over fishing rights between certain clans, the question of whether to send an embassy to a far-off kingdom rumored to have tamed wyverns. Ira listened to each matter carefully, offering reasoned judgments and calling upon Rowan or the senior clan lords for advice. At times, tensions flared, especially when clans with long-standing rivalries had to negotiate. But Ira insisted on fairness and unity. The North's strength lay in cohesion, in the knowledge that they had no one but each other to rely on in the face of a dangerous world. By mid-afternoon, the meeting concluded, and Ira's head throbbed with the burden of so many details. She dismissed the clan representatives to their lodging halls and excused herself from further sessions. Only Rowan remained behind, along with one quiet figure, Galen, a scribe who had recently arrived from the southwestern part of the north. He was a soft-spoken individual with keen eyes, and he had requested a private audience. Ira gestured for him to speak, though fatigue tugged at her. "Your Majesty," Galen said, "I come with news from the Helmfirth region. Something unusual has transpired there. We have found signs of a ruin in the high foothills, partially revealed by an avalanche. At first, we thought it an old fortress, but upon excavation, we discovered remnants of sculptures that resemble dragons. Ancient runes, too. Very old, not the standard runes we see in the north, but something older. The local lord asked that I travel here to request your guidance. Some believe it could be a draconic temple." Rowan's brow lifted. "Fascinating. The north has its share of ruins, but not many so old that even we do not recognize the script. Are there any immediate threats?" Galen shrugged. "No direct threats so far. But the last team that went to explore deeper reported strange whispering. They claimed the walls themselves murmured. One of them fell into a trance and refused to leave. Rumor has spread among the villagers that something powerful slumbers there. The local authorities wish to contain panic." Ira exchanged a glance with Rowan. "We cannot ignore such a place, particularly if it has ties to dragons. Our knowledge of the old ways is limited, and if there is an artifact or magic there, we should see it secured before scavengers or cultists get their hands on it." Rowan leaned forward. "I would advise a small party, Your Majesty. We don't wish to draw too much attention." Ira stood, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. "I will go myself. The North is in a precarious state of rebirth, and if this place truly holds ancient draconic secrets, I should see them with my own eyes." Rowan nodded gravely, though his concern was plain. "Then let us prepare a discreet expedition." They spent the next hour planning. Ira wanted to be gone at first light, leaving the day-to-day governance to her council temporarily. A minimal retinue would accompany her, Rowan for his expertise in runes and magic, a handful of the Dragon Knights to handle any dangers, and perhaps an experienced scout from the region to guide them. Galen offered to come as well, since he was already familiar with the site. By the time Ira retired to her quarters, a sense of grim excitement filled her. She had yearned for respite from the endless swirl of administrative duties, though she had not expected it to come in the form of investigating ancient ruins. The dreams that haunted her might find an echo there, she thought, or perhaps a clue. Maybe it was a chance to glean deeper understanding of the bond that had awakened the dragons. The next morning, true to plan, Ira set out from Stormhelm. The day dawned bleak, with a sharp wind off the sea and heavy clouds scudding across the sky, but she felt invigorated by the cold. She rode at the head of a small column. Rowan, swathed in a thick cloak, perched on a sturdy northern pony. Daria and Gunnar astride their dragons, Zyros and Hrondr, who flew overhead in lazy circles to keep watch. 3 other knights without dragons riding behind, along with Galen and 2 scouts from Helmfirth. Altogether, fewer than a dozen people. They left behind the bustle of the capital, forging westward toward the high passes. Snowdrifts grew deeper as the road climbed, but the weather had eased since the worst of winter, allowing them to proceed at a decent pace. Their journey took 3 days, passing scattered villages where the people greeted Ira with awe and reverence. A queen with dragons overhead, one would have to be blind not to recognize them, though the group tried to avoid spectacle. Each night, they lodged at small inns or sheltered in watchtowers, sharing basic meals of stew and bread. Rowan studied maps by firelight, comparing them to Galen's sketches of the ruins. Ira found herself mulling over the significance of an ancient draconic site. Since the North's shift into the Dragon Kingdom, they had pieced together some knowledge of old legends, but there was still so much they did not understand. The bond Ira and a handful of others had forged with the dragons felt instinctive rather than fully deliberate. A puzzle of the soul. On the 4th day, the party ascended a twisting mountain trail. The trees grew sparse, replaced by jagged outcrops of rock. Now and then, swirling gusts of snow and ice forced them to stop or shelter behind ridges. Daria and Gunnar scouted ahead with their dragons, marking safe routes. By afternoon, they glimpsed a cluster of tents in the distance, the small encampment that Helmfirth's local lord had set up near the newly revealed ruins. About a dozen workers bustled about, carting rubble away from a massive stone doorway half buried in the mountainside. When Ira and her retinue approached, the workers hurried to greet them, gaping at the sight of dragons landing in the snow. A local official, a rotund man with a thick beard, introduced himself as Lord Hendrik of Helmfirth. He welcomed Ira formally, bowing low, though he couldn't hide his nerves. "Your Majesty, we're honored you've come. This site has our people on edge. Some think it's cursed. Others claim it must be revered. We've kept the area restricted as you requested." Ira dismounted, scanning the scene. The stone doorway featured carved reliefs of dragons in flight, their wings bridging arcs of swirling lines that resembled wind or water. The style was unlike anything she had seen, less angular than most northern carvings, more fluid and ancient. A frig. ID draft emanated from the doorway, making the hairs on her neck prickle. "We'll investigate," she said. "Thank you for securing the site." Lord Hendrik bowed again. "We're at your service. I would advise caution." 3 men who ventured too far inside fled, raving about voices in their heads. Another refused to leave. "We had to drag him out and he remains catatonic." Rowan frowned. "Have you posted guards?" "Yes, my Lord Archmage," Hendrik replied. "But the place seems quiet now. No one else has attempted to go deep. We feared losing more folk." Ira called the group to gather near the entrance. "We move carefully. No one wanders off alone. Rowan, you'll take the lead in deciphering these runes. Daria, Gunnar, keep watch. If the dragons sense anything amiss, you let us know immediately." Daria inclined her head. "We'll stay close, my queen." Gunnar only grunted, resting his large hand on the hilt of his war axe. With torches lit, the small group ventured inside. The cavernous entry sloped downward, the walls lined with columns of rock that might have been carved or shaped by water ages ago. The air felt damp and impossibly still, as though time itself had paused. Their footsteps echoed. Occasionally, water dripped from the ceiling, forming clear pools at the edge of the path. On either side, they noticed faint inscriptions in an ancient script that Rowan paused to examine. He traced the symbols with a gloved finger, chanting softly under his breath. Ira watched him, noticing how his eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Do you recognize anything?" she asked. "Some," Rowan admitted. "It's related to the runes we use in modern northern magic, but the structure is older. I see references to a cycle of renewal. And the word heart keeps repeating, the heart of the world, or perhaps the heart of the storm. Hard to translate precisely." "What about the voices the workers heard?" Daria asked from behind, her voice echoing in the gloom. Rowan shook his head. "I sense a lingering magic here. It may react to certain minds. Let us remain vigilant." They proceeded deeper, following a winding corridor that eventually opened into a chamber. At first, it seemed empty, save for the carved pillars that supported the ceiling high above. Then their torches revealed mosaic floors strewn with debris. Broken pottery, collapsed stones, shards of obsidian, odds and ends that hinted at a culture lost to time. Ira knelt to examine a piece of pottery. It bore a stylized dragon's head, painted in deep reds and golds. She felt a fleeting tremor run through her, as if the image itself stared back at her. An eerie hush pressed in. No one spoke as they advanced carefully. The mosaic underfoot depicted dragons in flight around a central symbol, a circle with a swirling interior pattern. Ira's eyes kept being drawn to it, a sense of familiarity lurking in the back of her mind. Rowan paused there, kneeling, letting his fingertips hover over the design. Magic crackled faintly in the air, stirring the hairs on their arms. Galen stood nearby, scribbling notes onto a parchment with wide-eyed fascination. "This pattern," Rowan murmured. "It resonates with the draconic bond. I feel it like a subtle hum in my bones." Gunnar shifted, scanning the walls. "Is it safe? Feels like something's watching us." None had an answer. Ira drew a slow breath. "Let's see if there's more to this chamber." They circled the perimeter, poking through fallen blocks of stone. The passage extended on the far side, continuing deeper. Daria volunteered to scout ahead with caution. She and Zyros had developed a form of silent communication. Though the dragon had stayed outside, Ira knew that if Zyros sensed Daria's fear, the emerald beast would come storming in. For now, Daria crept forward, torch up, checking for pitfalls or hidden passages. After a moment, she signaled the others to follow. Down another corridor, they found a second chamber smaller than the first. The doorless entryway was blocked by rubble, but there was space enough to squeeze through. On the other side, Ira's torchlight fell upon a circular room with walls covered in more inscriptions. But dominating the center stood a statue nearly as tall as a man. At first, they saw only the silhouette, a dragon perched atop a base shaped like a swirling vortex. As they moved closer, they realized the statue's eyes were set with faintly glowing gemstones, a bluish hue reminiscent of ice. "Impressive," Rowan breathed, stepping closer. "Those stones might be dragon stones. The color is right." Ira felt another wave of that subtle thrumming in the air, like a chord of music just on the edge of hearing. "This place, it feels alive." Rowan nodded, face etched with wonder. "Ancient magic flows here, likely from the days when humans and dragons were first aligned. Before even the earliest recorded kingdoms of the North, perhaps from a time beyond our known histories." Galen approached with trembling curiosity, parchment and quill at the ready. "I see runes all around the base of the statue. Could we translate them?" Rowan set to work, muttering partial incantations and glancing at references in a small rune dictionary he carried. Ira stood watch, trying to keep her breathing calm. The atmosphere pressed upon them all, a heavy intangible weight. She couldn't shake the feeling that the statue itself regarded her, waiting. At length, Rowan exhaled slowly. "I can make out something akin to an invocation. It mentions the Heart of Winter and the Keeper of Storms. This might have been a shrine to a particular draconic entity, a powerful guardian or spirit." He traced a line of runes. "Here, it mentions a communion of minds and something about mortal blood. I'm not fully certain, but it suggests a rite, a binding." Ira's pulse quickened. "A binding between humans and dragons, like the bond we share? Or something else?" "Possibly. The words aren't perfectly clear." Rowan touched the statue's base. "Let me see if I can glean more." Before he could do so, a soft voice spoke from behind them, making everyone whirl. One of the Hellfirth scouts, Thora, a short woman with braided hair, had evidently followed them in but lingered near the entrance. She wore a troubled expression. "Your Majesty, I heard something in my head." A whisper. Her eyes flicked around the chamber. "It called me by name." Ira carefully approached. "We must remain calm, Thora." "What did it say?" She swallowed, her torch quivering. "It said, 'The blood is strong. Bring it forth.'" "I don't understand." Rowan and Ira exchanged tense looks. The reference to blood was consistent with the partial translations. Gunnar pressed closer, hand tightening on the handle of his axe. "This place is too eerie. Let's smash that statue and be done." Ira raised a hand. "Wait, we don't destroy knowledge so hastily." "Rowan, is there a danger that we're dealing with something malevolent?" Rowan shook his head slowly. "Not necessarily malevolent. This could be a remnant of a very old draconic power, maybe even a slumbering consciousness. But we must be cautious. If it's beckoning a certain type of blood, it might have recognized Thora as having some lineage or resonance." Thora paled. "My grandmother was rumored to be from a line touched by dragons, but that's just old family lore." "That lore could be real," Rowan said. "You might carry latent magic." Ira stepped forward, trying to calm the scout. "We won't force you to proceed. If you wish to leave, do so now." Thora looked conflicted, but she set her jaw. "I'll stay, Your Majesty. I can do my duty." Ira respected the courage in those words, though she worried about the risk. "Very well. We'll proceed carefully." Rowan, continue translating, but do not attempt to activate anything. Rowan nodded, resuming his study. Meanwhile, the rest of them fanned out, examining the chamber for any additional clues. Galen carefully sketched the statue and the runes, his quill scratching on parchment. The quiet returned, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Torchlight flickered across the carved dragon's wings. Ira's gaze lingered on the gemstone eyes. They almost seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Suddenly, Thora gasped, dropping her torch. She doubled over, pressing her hands to her head. Ira rushed to her side. What is it? It's in my head again, Thora choked out. A voice. It's calling me to the statue. It says, set me free. Rowan scrambled up, staff at the ready. We must withdraw. This shrine is clearly exerting influence on her mind. But Thora shook her head, struggling against the pain. No. I can push it back, but it's so strong. Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes. It's calling for a key, my blood. I think it wants me to touch the statue. Gunnar's scowl deepened. This is madness. We can't risk letting some ancient power loose. Ira weighed the risks. If they fled, they might leave a dangerous, unstable magic behind, something that could reach out to others or even corrupt them. If they destroyed it outright, they might lose a relic that could hold vital knowledge for the North, knowledge of the Dragon Bond, the magic that fueled their new kingdom's very identity. And if they tried to satisfy its demand, who knew what they might unleash? Before she could decide, Thora staggered toward the statue, one hand extended despite her trembling. I can't bear this constant whisper. I'll do it, she managed. I'll endure it if it means understanding. Wait. Ira moved to intercept, but Rowan stopped her gently, eyes grave. Your Majesty, this might be the only way to quell it. Perhaps we should allow her to touch the statue under controlled conditions. I'll be ready with wards. Thora's breath came in ragged bursts, but she seemed determined. Gunnar and Daria positioned themselves on either side of her, weapons ready. Ira, too, hovered close, her own sword half-drawn. She nodded to Rowan, who began murmuring a protective incantation, runes glowing faintly along his staff. Thora stepped up to the statue. Carefully, she pressed her palm against the stone pedestal. At once, the glowing gemstones in the dragon's eyes flared brighter. A swirl of cold air whipped around the chamber, snuffing two of their torches. Thora let out a low cry but kept her hand there. A faint line of blood trickled from under her palm as though the stone had become sharp. Her eyes rolled back. Ira lunged forward, ready to pull her away, but Thora held firm. A disembodied voice, deep and resonant, filled the chamber, at last. The bond stirs again. Everyone froze. It was not a physical voice, but more like a presence in their minds, echoing off the walls. Ira felt it reverberate through her chest, strong yet ancient, carrying a sense of longing. Who speaks? Rowan demanded, his staff radiating a protective shimmer. Silence stretched, then the voice returned, fainter this time. Once we were many. Keepers of the storm, guardians of the cradle of frost. Our covenant with humankind lay sundered by betrayal, but now the blood returns, and with it the echo of our vow. Thora's lips moved, but the voice was not hers. Will you restore what was broken? Ira's heart pounded. Restore? Are you a spirit bound to this place? A swirl of icy wind whipped through, making them shiver. We are a remnant, a memory. The heart of winter's flame once danced in these halls, uniting mortal and draconic essence. Now only fragments remain. If you hold the bond, if you would see it renewed, you must seek the heart. Free it from the gloom beyond the frozen sea, restore the circle, or the darkness will claim all. Abruptly, Thora's body went slack. Daria and Gunnar caught her before she collapsed. The glowing in the statue's eyes dimmed to a faint flicker. Ira knelt beside Thora, searching her face. The scout's eyes fluttered open, dazed. A shallow cut on her palm bled, staining the stone. Rowan pressed a cloth to her wound. She'll be all right, though her mind may need time to recover. Ira stood, facing the statue. The final words of the presence echoed in her head. Seek the heart, gloom beyond the frozen sea. She thought of her persistent dreams, dark shapes in the night, a sense of coiling threat. The statue's message implied that the bond with dragons was incomplete, that some piece of ancient magic had yet to be restored. Could it be related to the stirring she sensed across the realm? To the grief that still weighed on her after Carthandros' death? What do you think it meant? Gunnar asked, voice tinged with awe he rarely showed. Rowan exhaled. There are old legends about a heart of winter. Some texts refer to it as an artifact of draconic power, said to have sustained their presence in our world. But the references are always fragmentary, relegated to myth. Galen, who had kept quiet until now, looked up from his scribbles. I recall a story told by my grandmother about a place called Frostorn far to the north. She said it was cursed, locked in eternal storms. No one who went there ever returned. Could that be the frozen sea we must cross? Ira frowned. I've heard similar tales from sailors. Frostmourne Isle is said to be beset by year-round blizzards. If this heart of winter is hidden there, it would explain why no one has found it. Daria stood, helping Thora stay upright. This is dangerous territory, my queen. We only just secured our freedom from the south. Are we prepared to embark on a quest for a relic that might be mere legend? Ira's thoughts drifted to her dream visions. She recalled the sense of looming threat, the black helms, the red lightning, the images of dragons bound by cruel chains. The presence they had just encountered warned of darkness claiming all. She was certain the risk was real, that ignoring it might bring a doom they could not fight if unprepared. We can't afford ignorance, she said. The magic we've unleashed in the north grows stronger. We owe it to ourselves and to the dragons to understand the origin of our bond. If the heart of winter is real and if it's in peril, we must try to save it. Rowan nodded. Then we should plan an expedition. But we must do so wisely. The seas beyond the northern capes are treacherous. And if dark forces stir there, we'll need more than a small group. We'll also need a vessel capable of braving monstrous storms, Gunnar said. And a crew that doesn't lose courage when the waves rise like mountains. Ira swept her gaze across her companions, loyal knights, an old archmage, a brave but shaken scout, and a determined scholar. She felt the weight of responsibility sink deeper into her bones. The realm was still healing from war, the southern threat might flare again at any time. But this new danger reached beyond petty politics. If an ancient malevolence threatened the core of the draconic bond, the North's hard-won sovereignty might mean little in the face of worldwide catastrophe. We'll keep this knowledge contained for now, she told them softly. We don't want to so panic. Let's gather more information. Rowan, see what our archives might hold about Frostmourne Isle or any references to the Heart of Winter. Galen, your help in cross-referencing folktales could be invaluable. Daria, Gunnar, contact our best shipwrights and captains quietly. Thora, I need you to rest until you're recovered. We'll send word to Store Helm that we've discovered an ancient shrine, but we won't mention the statue's message in detail until we know more. They agreed, though tension lingered in the chamber. The statue loomed in the torchlight, silent once more, its gemstone eyes dark. Ira quietly vowed to protect her people even if that protection required venturing beyond the known boundaries of the north. The memory of Carthandros felt near, as though his spirit hovered in these halls, urging her onward. As they emerged from the ruins, the wind gusting around them, she lifted her face to the gray sky. Yes, she missed him, but she couldn't falter. She was queen, entrusted with the legacy of dragons and the fate of her kingdom. Her path led forward into realms as cold and unforgiving as the ice beneath her feet. They departed Helfirth the next day, leaving a small contingent to monitor the shrine under Lord Hendrick's supervision. Thora, though shaken, insisted on riding back with Ira, determined to prove her resilience. As for Rowan, he was both excited and uneasy about the mention of the Heart of Winter, speculating that this artifact might explain the reawakening of the dragons and the threat her dreams suggested. Gunnar and Daria, flying overhead with their dragons, kept a wary watch for any sign of trouble, but the skies were mercifully calm. Upon returning to Store Helm, Ira wasted no time convening a secret council. She included only her most trusted advisors, Rowan, Daria, Gunnar, Corin, as a representative of the Draga Keepers, given his unique bond with Mjorn, plus a few clan lords known for their discretion. Galen presented his findings, recounting the old stories of Frostmourne, all that he had gathered from elders in his region. Rowan brought out musty tomes from the royal archives, turning pages yellowed by centuries. They learned that the isle lay far north of the usual shipping lanes, shrouded by perpetual storms that battered any ship attempting to land. Legends spoke of monsters dwelling in the freezing depths, creatures that devoured entire vessels. More intriguing were scattered references to a lost temple or citadel rumored to exist on the island, a place that some texts linked to the earliest days of the Dragon Bond. As the nights passed, Ira's dreams grew more vivid. In one, she saw a swirl of howling winds and shifting ice. A colossal shape rose from the sea, some monstrous leviathan with eyes of molten red. In the background, dragons cried out, their wings entangled in black chains. Through the dream, a single phrase echoed, "The heart is undone. The darkness comes." She woke in a cold sweat, feeling as though a presence lingered in her room. But when she lit the lamp, nothing was there, only the flickering shadows and the distant call of a lone dragon in the night sky. She feared that whatever had awakened in that shrine might be part of a larger ripple, a wave of magical resonance traveling across the realm. Could the Southern King exploit it? Or might it be an entirely different threat, older and more potent than mortal politics? The sorrow in her chest for Carthandros mingled with a mounting urgency. She needed answers, and soon. At the next secret council meeting, Rowan showed them a battered scroll. The script was archaic, but he had deciphered enough to deliver a startling revelation. This document mentions a great guardianship circle called the Seven Shards. They were apparently artifacts created to sustain the covenant between humans and dragons. The Heart of Winter was central to them. Some believe it was a physical vessel containing draconic essence. If it's been lost or corrupted, that could destabilize the bond. Corin frowned. The dragons we have now, will they be harmed if the heart is corrupted? Rowan pursed his lips. It's possible. They might weaken, or worse. The impetus that drew them back to our world could reverse. Already we see how difficult it is for them to breed, how fragile the eggs can be. The presence of the heart might be critical for their long-term survival. Ira drummed her fingers on the table. If that's true, we must ensure the heart remains safe or is restored. We owe everything to these creatures. Without them, the North would likely still be under the Southern throne. Gunnar crossed his arms. So we're to mount an expedition into a land of lethal storms and sea monsters? Who among us is mad enough to volunteer? Daria arched an eyebrow. All of us, I suspect. The question is how to sail there without losing the entire fleet. They spent hours discussing strategies. The risk of taking too large a force was that the storms might sink them all, but too small a force might fail against unknown dangers. Eventually, they settled on a compromise, a single sturdy vessel outfitted with the best charts, navigators, and a specialized contingency for both sea and land exploration. Daria and Gunnar would fly overhead on Zyros and Hrondr, providing aerial support. Ira resolved to go herself. Not only was she the queen and the final authority on draconic matters, but her bond sense might be crucial. Rowan likewise insisted on accompanying them. Corin volunteered, believing that Bjorn's younger, smaller size might be an advantage in navigating the storms. Moreover, his empathy for dragons was invaluable. Several knights and sailors were chosen carefully, drawn from those who had proven loyalty and skill. Preparations consumed weeks. Stormhelm's harbor bustled with activity as shipwrights worked on reinforcing the hull of a stout vessel called the Iron Seeker. The ship's captain, a wiry woman named Captain Aldries, had charted the northern seas many times, though never so far as Frostmorn Isle. She demanded additional supplies, new sails, and an arsenal of harpoons in case sea serpents lurked in the deep. Word spread quietly that the Queen planned a royal voyage for diplomatic reasons, though the details were closely guarded. Ira was careful not to reveal the true nature of their destination, lest it invite sabotage or panic. Meanwhile, the dragons displayed growing restlessness. They roamed the skies more frequently, sometimes disappearing for days before returning. Corin swore that Bjorn seemed agitated at night, pacing along the castle parapets. Daria reported that Zyros slept fitfully, twitching and whining in a manner uncharacteristic of the proud emerald drake. Even the older dragons roosting near Stormhelm's peaks had begun to gather, circling each other in tense formations, as though anticipating confrontation. Ira sensed it too, a slow, pulsing disquiet in her chest, as if something far away was summoning them all, calling them into danger. At last, the day came when the Iron Seeker was deemed ready. Ira gathered her retinue on the docks at dawn. The sea stretched out before them, dark and choppy, the distant horizon obscured by a band of pale mist. Seagulls cried overhead, swirling in the brisk wind. Daria and Gunnar mounted their dragons on a rocky outcrop near the harbor, while Corin stood by Bjorn, who ruffled his azure wings nervously. Rowan, clad in a heavier cloak than usual, muttered incantations under his breath, seeking fair weather for their departure. The chosen knights and sailors waited aboard the ship, checking rigging and stowing gear. Captain Aldries paced the deck, barking orders for a prompt launch. Before boarding, Ira paused to address the small gathering of onlookers who had come to see them off. A hush fell over the crowd, who sensed that this was no ordinary voyage despite the official explanation. She offered them a reassuring smile. "My people, we embark today not merely on a diplomatic journey but on a quest to safeguard the North. We sail with courage in our hearts and dragons above us, for we stand as one kingdom, human and draconic alike. Whatever lies beyond these waters, know that we face it on your behalf. We will return." Soft cheers and murmurs greeted her words. She looked beyond them at the spires of Store Helm rising against a somber sky. Memories flashed. Carthandros's body on the pyre, the roar of the final battle, the vow she had made to preserve the dragon's legacy. This was the next step in fulfilling that vow. She boarded the Iron Seeker. The sails unfurled, catching the crisp wind. One by one, the mooring lines were cast off, and the ship glided away from the pier with surprising grace, the water churning in its wake. Overhead, Daria and Gunnar took flight, their dragons beating powerful wings, while Corin and Jorn rose behind them. The onlookers waved from the harbor walls. Ira lifted a hand in reply, then turned her gaze forward. The open sea beckoned, each wave a challenge. Somewhere beyond the veil of mist lay Frostmourne Isle, and perhaps the heart of winter, if indeed it existed. Captain Aldries set a course northwest, trusting the charts that mapped the safer passages between reefs and shoals. Though the chill wind stung, Ira found the brine-scented air invigorating. She stood by the prow for hours, watching the horizon. Now and then, a dragon silhouette passed overhead, the beat of wings audible over the crash of waves. Rowan joined her, carefully balancing a sheaf of parchment containing translations of the old scrolls. "We'll follow the coastline for a time," he explained, "then strike out into open waters, where the currents grow fierce. The real challenge will come once we leave known territory behind." Ira nodded. "I recall the stories of ghost ships rumored to drift near Frostmourne Isle. I wonder how many were drawn by the same legends that compel us now." "Likely more than we know," Rowan said softly. "And not all might have had good intentions. Some could have been drawn to harness the artifact's power, only to be swallowed by the storms." She gripped the railing. "We'll do better." Over the next week, the Iron Seeker made steady progress along the jagged coast, often sheltered by natural fjords. Daria and Gunnar used their vantage in the sky to scout for hidden hazards, while Corin and Jorn took turns patrolling lower altitudes. At night, the dragons roost on cliffs or circled overhead, occasionally landing on the ship's reinforced deck if the winds were calm. Conversation with the sailors was subdued. The men and women of the crew knew not to pry. They were paid well and understood the Queen's need for secrecy. Ira spent those nights below deck with Rowan and Galen, poring over charts, cross-referencing sea currents, and reviewing the partial translations. Thora, though left behind for her own well-being, had entrusted Galen with a letter containing further family lore about draconic blood. Ira felt pangs of guilt for leaving Thora behind, but the scout had still been fragile after her experience at the shrine. The last thing Ira wanted was to endanger her further. As they ventured farther north, the weather shifted. The winds grew colder, biting through even the thickest cloaks. Sprawling ice floes appeared on the horizon, drifting like pale ghosts in the water. The dragons, once free to roam, became more cautious, staying close to the ship or to safe rocky outcroppings. Captain Aldries carefully navigated around fields of jagged ice, cursing under her breath when the floes threatened to trap them. Her skill and experience proved invaluable, though, and the Iron Seeker pressed on. During one eerie dusk, the setting sun cast the clouds in a bloody red hue. The sea took on a dark sheen, and the wind moaned like a living thing. Ira stood at the stern, gazing at that crimson skyline with unease. A prickle up her spine warned her of impending danger. Gunnar, resting near the main mast, voiced a similar concern. "I've sailed enough times to know this color in the sky often heralds a fierce storm." Before long, rain lashed the deck, quickly turning to sleet. Waves rocked the ship so violently that some crew members lost their footing and had to cling to the rigging. Overhead, Daria and Gunnar struggled to keep their dragons airborne in the gale. Corin hastened to stow supplies securely and calm Jorn, who hissed at the raging winds. Ira joined the crew in securing cargo and battening hatches. She refused to stay in her cabin, refusing to hide while her people braved the storm. Lightning tore across the clouds, thunder booming so loud it felt like the sky was splitting open. Sheets of freezing rain reduced visibility to almost nothing. Captain Aldries, drenched to the bone, clutched the helm, barking orders to her helmsman. Another lightning flash revealed enormous waves cresting off the starboard bow. Ira's heart lurched as she saw the water's mountainous swell, black except for white foam at the top. The wave towered over them. "Brace!" roared the captain. The wave crashed onto the deck, drenching them in freezing brine. Ira coughed, spat out salt water, and clung to a rope to avoid being swept away. Through the chaos, she glimpsed something like a serpentine shape thrashing in the foam. An illusion, or maybe some sea beast stirred by the storm. Adrenaline surged. She barely caught sight of Rowan, who had lashed himself to the railing. Gunnar bellowed from above, urging Hrondr to climb. But the wind battered the dragon's wings. Flames erupted from Hrondr's maw in defiance, quickly snuffed by the torrential rain. Another wave hit, even more massive than the first. The Iron Seeker groaned under the impact. Timber creaked, and Ira feared the ship might snap in half. Then, through the sheets of lightning, she saw a great swirling vortex forming in the sea behind them. The water churned with an unnatural, spiraling motion that defied the normal patterns of a storm. For a brief, horrifying moment, she thought they might be dragged into the vortex. The captain wrestled the helm, guiding the vessel away from that watery maw. Still, the swirl continued, and Ira sensed an undercurrent of magic, dark and malevolent, in the air. She felt it as a tingling in her fingertips, as if the presence from the shrine had awakened something out here in the open ocean. Or perhaps something had sensed their mission, summoning a storm to thwart them. A savage gust tore through the rigging, snapping a sail. Fragments of canvas whipped wildly. Crew members rushed to contain the damage, cursing the monstrous winds. Ira stumbled across the slick deck to help, nearly losing her footing again. Thunder crashed overhead. She glimpsed Corin across the deck, hugging Jorn's neck to comfort the frightened dragon, who spat small bursts of frostfire into the storm. "Ira!" Rowan's voice reached her ears through the din. He stood near the prow, pointing. She forced her way to him, water stinging her eyes. He gestured toward the swirling sea. "Look!" Blinking against the spray, she squinted. The vortex spun with terrifying speed. Something like lightning crackled at its edges, tinted an eerie red. For an instant, she thought of her nightmares. Red lightning shackling dragons, darkness swirling. Then, with a final surge, the vortex collapsed into the waves, sending a shockwave that rocked the Iron Seeker violently. Ira fell to her knees, the impact jarring her bones. When she pushed herself up, she realized the vortex was gone, leaving only roiling water and a receding storm. In the wake of that bizarre phenomenon, the storm began to abate, though the sea still raged enough to keep them on high alert. Captain Aldries, drenched but unbowed, steered the ship away from the worst of the turbulence. Eventually, the wind died to a stiff breeze, and the rain thinned to a drizzle. Pale stars emerged, their light glimmering on the battered deck. Exhausted, the crew slumped where they stood, grateful to have survived. Ira stood by the railing, chest heaving, her clothes soaked. Her heart still pounded, adrenaline surging. Rowan joined her, leaning on his staff. Their eyes met, and neither had to speak to convey the same uneasy thought: that was no ordinary storm. Something had either targeted them or manifested near them for reasons unknown. The random violence of the sea had felt directed, purposeful. By morning, the sea lay calmer, though an overcast sky gave little comfort. The Iron Seeker had lost 2 sails and sustained damage to the port side. The weary crew set about repairs. Ira and Rowan gathered the others, Gunnar, Daria, Corin, and they compared impressions. Daria had glimpsed flickers of red lightning near the vortex. Gunnar had felt an ominous pressure, like a ringing in his ears. Corin recalled that Jorn had roared in terror at the storm's peak as though sensing a presence. None knew exactly what to conclude, except that the path north would not be easy. They pressed onward. Days blurred into a grueling routine of navigating ice-choked waters, repairing damage from waves, and enduring relentless cold. The dragons flew overhead when they could, but even they seemed uneasy in these latitudes. Food grew increasingly bland and rationed. Sleep was fitful. Ira spent many nights pacing the deck, scanning the dark horizon, half expecting another magical maelstrom. Yet no further storms came, only an unrelenting gray gloom, as though they had entered a realm where the sun forgot to shine. At last, they spotted a shape materializing out of the mist, a towering cliff of ice-caked rock that rose sheer from the sea. Captain Aldries announced that according to the charts, this could be Frostorn Isle. The coastline was lined with jagged spires of stone, hammered by waves. An unnatural hush pervaded the air, broken only by the distant keening of the wind. No birds soared overhead and no signs of vegetation marred the stark, frozen cliffs. It was a place that seemed forsaken by life. Ira gathered her companions on deck. We've come this far. Let us find a suitable cove to anchor and then search for a way inland. Captain Aldries had already spied a narrow inlet that might serve as a harbor. With painstaking caution, she guided the Iron Seeker between looming ice formations. The water was eerily still here, reflecting the sharp ridges of the island's coast like black glass. Daria and Gunnar scouted from above, confirming that a small beach waited at the head of the inlet, one that might allow them to land. Anxious tension seized everyone. They were at the threshold of the unknown. When the ship finally dropped anchor in the sheltered cove, the crew breathed a collective sigh of relief. Ira, accompanied by Rowan, Corin, Daria, Gunnar, and a handful of knights, prepared to go ashore. They donned heavier furs and carried weapons. The dragons circled overhead, scanning the cliffs. Jorn landed gingerly on the gravelly beach, sniffing the air and letting out a forlorn whine. Ira felt a chill that went deeper than the cold wind. The place felt haunted, devoid of warmth or color. Captain Aldries remained with the ship, leaving a skeleton crew to guard it. She would dispatch a few rowboats if they needed additional supplies. But none of them wanted to linger too long in these waters. The jagged shapes of icebergs near the entrance of the cove seemed to shift ominously, as if waiting to entrap unwary vessels. Ira promised the captain they would return if they could and told her to be ready for a swift departure should circumstances demand it. Led by Daria's scouting and Rowan's reading of arcane currents, they set off inland. The terrain rose steeply from the shore, transitioning from rocky beach to a hazardous slope of ice-laden scree. Up above, massive cliffs towered, their faces scarred by centuries of harsh weather. The wind howled through fissures in the rock, carrying an eerie wail that made the knights glance about nervously. Even Gunnar, usually unshakable, muttered a prayer under his breath. The dragons soared overhead but found few safe places to land, so they scouted ahead in wide arcs. Occasionally, Ira caught sight of Hronder's bronze scales glinting in a stray sunbeam that broke the gloom. The entire island felt like a labyrinth of canyons and ice caves. She found herself marveling at the hostility of it. Surely no mortal settlement could survive here. Yet the sense of ancient magic prickled her awareness, compelling her onward despite the chill fear in her gut. After hours of laborious climbing, they reached a plateau, a relatively flat expanse of ice and rock stretching toward a jagged mountain range that dominated the island's interior. The peaks beyond were so high they seemed to scrape the clouds. Snow drifted across the plateau in swirling eddies. Ahead, a wide chasm cut the land in two, as if cleaved by a colossal blade. At the far side, Ira glimpsed what might be man-made structures, low, blocky shapes half buried in snow. She halted the group, lifting a hand to shield her eyes. Rowan peered through a spyglass, mouth grim. "Stone walls, definitely," he reported. "Looks like ruins. No movement that I can see." Ira studied the area. A rickety rope bridge spanned the chasm, though it looked ancient and precarious. "We'll have to cross. Daria, can you or Gunnar find a better way?" Daria shook her head. "We scouted from above. The chasm continues for miles in either direction. This is the only crossing we saw, aside from a scattering of ice shelves that looked even more treacherous." Gunnar eyed the bridge skeptically. "One at a time, I'd say. Dragons might be able to carry a few of us across, but the wind is fierce and we risk being blown into the ravine." So they prepared for the bridge crossing. It creaked ominously underfoot, swaying in the gusts. One knight nearly slipped, sending a spray of snow into the dizzying drop below. Ira's pulse pounded as she carefully inched across, the rope rails digging into her gloves. Rowan followed behind, chanting a minor ward to keep the wind from buffeting them too violently. The dragons soared overhead in slow circles, carefully avoiding the unpredictable downdrafts that swirled near the chasm. Eventually, they all reached the other side with hearts racing, boots crunching on the frosty ground. Beyond, they found the remains of a gateway, a pair of half-collapsed towers connected by a broken arch. Beyond that arch, a courtyard of sorts lay open to the sky, ringed by walls caked in ice. In the center rose a structure that might once have been a grand hall, its roof partially collapsed, letting in shards of pale light. Ira led the way, senses on high alert. The wind whistled through cracks in the stone. No living thing stirred. They stepped into the courtyard. Snow crunched underfoot, revealing faint mosaic patterns beneath the frost, reminiscent of the designs they had seen in the Helfirth ruins. Ira's breath caught. This place bore the hallmarks of the same civilization. She knelt, brushing snow aside to reveal draconic motifs carved into the ground. "We're close," she murmured. "I can feel it." The subtle thrumming that she had felt before was stronger here, like a quiet heartbeat in the stone. Rowan nodded, shivering slightly. Yes, the magic is concentrated in that central hall. Without warning, a low, mournful growl echoed through the ruins. Jorn, who had alighted near a crumbled column, hissed, eyes narrowing. Corin moved to his side. What is it, boy? What do you sense? The dragon spread his wings defensively, tail lashing. Daria and Gunnar readied their weapons, scanning the shadows. Ira stood, hand on her sword hilt. A moment later, something massive shifted behind the broken arch. At first, Ira thought it was a fallen statue, but then it moved with a serpentine slither. A monstrous shape slid into view, covered in overlapping scales the color of dirty ice. It had the elongated body of a WIRM, easily as thick around as a small tree with a maw full of needle-like teeth. Its eyes glowed with an eerie pale light. The beast emitted a guttural hiss, coiling its body around a broken column. Droplets of frozen sludge dripped from its jaw. The knights cursed, forming a defensive line. Rowan's staff crackled with arcane energy. The D. Dragons overhead let out warning roars. The creature hissed again, a sound that reverberated across the courtyard. Ira recognized the primal hunger in its posture. We can't let it cut us off, Gunnar growled, hefting his axe. We're surrounded by ruins. One strike from that tail could bring the walls down on us. Daria knocked an arrow, drawing her bow taut. We might not have a choice. Before Ira could order an attack, the WIRM lunged. Its sinuous body snapped forward with astonishing speed. One knight attempted to sidestep, but the creature's tail lashed out, smashing him against a wall. He slumped, unconscious or worse. Another knight thrust a spear, but the WIRM's scales deflected the blow and it knocked him aside like a rag doll. Gunnar charged with a roar, swinging his axe at the beast's flank. The impact jarred his arms, leaving only a minor gash in the thick scales. Daria loosed an arrow aimed at the creature's eyes, but it jerked its head aside. Rowan unleashed a burst of magical force which rippled across the WIRM's body, causing it to shriek in pain but not enough to stop it. Ira drew her sword, heart pounding, and rushed to support Gunnar. The WIRM roared, twisting its body in an attempt to encircle them. With a swift slice, Ira's sword found a chink near one of its segmented scales. The beast snarled, swinging its massive tail. She jumped back, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow. The courtyard shook. Loose stones tumbled from the partially collapsed hall. High above, the dragons circled, eager to help but wary of the tight quarters below. Corin guided Mjorn forward. Though smaller than Zyros or Hrondr, Mjorn was still formidable enough to leap at the WIRM, jaws snapping at its neck. The creature hissed in surprise as the young dragon's claws raked across its snout. It flailed, forcing Mjorn back with a swipe of its tail. Meanwhile, Daria sent another arrow whistling into the WIRM's side. Gunnar hacked at its flank again, opening a deeper wound this time. Blood, thick and dark, oozed onto the snow. Rowan conjured an orb of frost, hurling it into the creature's face. Ice crystallized across its eyes, and the WIRM reeled, temporarily blinded. Gunnar roared and sank his axe into the beast's neck with all his might. The WIRM thrashed violently, slamming him to the ground. Ira seized her chance. With a graceful lunge, she drove her sword into the exposed wound near its neck, angling upward to pierce vital organs. The beast let out an otherworldly shriek that rattled the crumbling walls. It bucked once more, nearly knocking her off balance, then collapsed in a heap of scales and snow. The courtyard fell silent, save for their ragged breathing. Ice-laden rubble clattered down from above. Ira yanked her sword free, breath billowing in the cold air. The WIRM lay still, a final shudder running through its length. Blood quickly froze on the ground. Daria ran to check the fallen knights. One was badly injured, the other only stunned. Rowan moved to heal the worst wounds, summoning what remained of his strength. Gunnar gingerly stood, wiping blood from his split lip. Mjorn let out a triumphant rumble, though he limped from a bruised foreleg. Corin cooed soothing words to him, checking for serious harm. Ira took a moment to steady her breath. The battle had been short but brutal. She eyed the WIRM's carcass with a mix of relief and dread. What other horrors might lurk in these ruins? At last, when the immediate crisis was contained, they regrouped in the courtyard. Ira gazed at the dark entrance of the partially collapsed hall. The sense of thrumming magic drew her closer, as if calling her name. Despite the danger, she felt certain their objective lay inside. We go on, she declared quietly, mindful of the wounded. Rowan nodded. We'll need to be swift. The commotion might draw other creatures. They proceeded carefully, leaving one knight outside to stand watch with Mjorn and the injured. The rest ventured into the gloom of the hall. Their torches revealed a vast chamber with vaulted ceilings. Much of the roof had caved in, letting in pillars of wan light. Snow had drifted into the corners. At the far end stood a dais, upon which rested something half-covered in ice. Carvings of dragons lined the walls, though many were obscured by frozen rubble. The air was thick with the same intangible magic they had sensed before, stronger than ever, making their skin tingle. As they drew closer to the dais, Ira saw that the object resting there appeared to be a massive crystal formation, perhaps the size of a large coffin. It shimmered with a faint inner glow, a swirl of pale blues and whites. It reminded her of an enormous dragonstone, but multiplied in complexity. Icy spires protruded from its surface, and swirling shapes within suggested a living current of energy. Rowan's voice trembled with awe. "I believe this is it, the heart of winter." Ira approached, forging through ankle-deep snow. She laid a hand on the crystal. Instantly, a surge of cold energy coursed through her arm, making her gasp. She sensed a presence within, ancient yet flickering like a candle on the verge of going out. Echoes of countless voices brushed against her mind. She felt a swirl of grief and longing so potent it almost buckled her knees. Rowan joined her, carefully resting his palm on the heart. "Yes, the artifact's energy is waning. There's corruption here, like a dark wound festering inside." Daria and Gunnar stood guard, scanning the shadows. They, too, felt the hum in the air, though not as acutely. Corin quietly approached, Bjorn peering in from the broken hall in trance, the young dragon's head cocked in curiosity. When Bjorn saw the crystal, he let out a soft trill and extended his neck, as if drawn to it. Ira almost felt the artifact respond, a faint pulse of invitation. "Corruption?" she repeated, torn between wonder and dread. Rowan nodded grimly. "The artifact is compromised. Something attacked its essence, draining or warping it. That could explain the storms, the WYRM, the illusions of red lightning. If the heart of winter is supposed to sustain the draconic bond, this corruption might bleed malevolent magic into the environment." Ira glanced at the swirling patterns within the crystal. She could see blackish tendrils threading through the pale glow, like cracks in the ice. "Can we purify it?" Rowan grimaced. "Such an act would require powerful magic, a ritual of restoration we know little about. The Helmfirth Shrine might offer clues, but that would mean returning there. We lack the knowledge to do this quickly. But if we leave it here corrupted, the storms and horrors will continue," Daria pointed out. "We might even face more unholy creatures." Gunnar let out a frustrated breath. "Is it possible to move the heart, bring it back to Storhelm? Our mages and dragons might help." Rowan regarded the massive crystal with concern. "Transporting an artifact of this magnitude is risky. We'd need a specially prepared vessel wards to contain its energies. And that's assuming it can be moved without worsening the damage." Ira thought of her nightmares of dragons in chains and red lightning. She thought of the swirling vortex that nearly swallowed their ship. Everything pointed to this cursed artifact as the source, or at least a catalyst. "We must try," she said with conviction. "We can't heal it here, in this forsaken place. If we let it remain, the corruption will spread. We have allies in the north, runesmiths, and the will of the dragons themselves. If we bring the heart home, maybe we can mend it." Rowan hesitated, weighing the dangers. "We'll need to craft a protective shell to contain its aura. We'll need help from the ship's crew and from the dragons to lift or carry it over that damned chasm." Corin stepped forward, placing a hand on Bjorn's snout. "We can do it. The dragons can assist. We only have to secure it carefully so it won't break." Daria nodded. "I'll help with Zyros. If we work together, we can ferry the crystal across the ravine in pieces or rig some sort of pulley." Gunnar cracked his knuckles. "Then let's do it. This place gives me the creeps, and I'd rather be gone before the day is out." Though the task seemed monumental, they set about making a plan. First, they cleared debris around the dais, exposing more runic inscriptions that might provide clues on how best to handle the heart. Rowan deciphered a few lines, cautioning them that direct contact for too long could harm a mortal's mind. They would need to wrap it in thick cloth and utilize runic wards to contain any magical leakage. Then came the question of physically lifting it. It was heavier than any one dragon could manage, but perhaps 2 or 3 working in tandem could shift it short distances. The main challenge was crossing the chasm. They decided to dismantle part of the rope bridge, then rig a harness system that allowed the dragons to carry the crystal halfway, while knights on either side steadied it with guide ropes. Time was short. The sun, feeble as it was, had already begun its descent, casting the ruins into long shadows. The group labored tirelessly, ignoring hunger and fatigue. Ira herself helped Rowan scribe words on a large swath of heavy canvas which they wrapped around the crystal. She felt pulses of cold that made her teeth chatter, but she steeled herself, focusing on the runic script. Gunnar and Daria cleared rubble and fashioned the harness lines from sturdy rope they'd brought for the expedition. Corin oversaw Mjorn's part, ensuring the young dragon understood the plan. At last, they managed to lift the heart cradled in layers of canvas from the dais. The artifact pulsed with faint, rhythmic light as if uncertain about leaving its ancient resting place. Ira prayed they were not making a fatal mistake by moving it. But she could sense the corruption within, a slow poison that demanded intervention. With grunts of effort, they carried it out of the hall and into the courtyard, detouring around the carcass of the slain WIRM. The dragons landed gingerly, wings stirring flurries of snow, and crouched to allow them to secure the harness. Bit by bit, they reached the chasm again. The battered rope bridge swayed in the rising wind. Gathering their courage, they prepared for the crossing. Gunnar stationed himself on the far side with a team of knights ready to pull the guide ropes. Daria, Ira, and Rowan stayed on the near side with Corin, the dragons, and the heart. Zyros, Hrondr, and Mjorn huddled close, rolling their wings to keep them warm in the frigid air. The plan called for Zyros and Hrondr to lift the heart in tandem, while Mjorn assisted from below, providing stability. The knights and Ira would steady it with ropes so it wouldn't sway too wildly. Rowan whispered protective incantations. Ira took a deep breath, nodding to her companions. On the count of 3, the 2 larger dragons rose with powerful wing beats, the harness straining under the weight. The heart rose from the ground, swaying precariously. Corin guided Mjorn, who hovered beneath, pressing gently against the crystal's underside. On the far side, Gunnar bellowed for the knights to pull the lines, controlling the lateral sway. Ira's arms strained as she gripped the rope, her feet planted, heart pounding at the risk. One slip and the artifact could tumble into the depths. The dragons struggled against the wind, which tugged at the heart like a giant hand trying to pluck it away. Snow flurries whipped around them. The harness groaned audibly, but it held. Inch by inch, they moved across the chasm. The minutes felt like hours. At one point, a sudden gust caught Zyros off guard, and the heart lurched sideways. Ira cried out, hauling on the rope with all her might. On the far side, Gunnar and the knights counterpulled. Mjorn rose, letting out a determined roar, pushing the artifact back on course. Zyros and Hrondr roared in unison, wings beating frantically. When the heart finally reached the far side, Gunnar and the knights hurried to relieve the dragons of the weight, lowering it onto the ground. The entire group exhaled in profound relief. The harness lines sagged and the dragons flopped onto the snowy ground, panting from the exertion. Ira and Rowan exchanged trembling smiles, marveling that they had succeeded in crossing the greatest obstacle. Corin gave Mjorn an affectionate pat, praising the young dragon's bravery. Daria flew across last, rejoining them. Their entire party stood on the far side of the chasm now, the heart safely in tow. Darkness loomed and the wind's howl grew keener. They had to press on, find their way back to the ship. The journey across the plateau and down the slopes was a grueling test of endurance, especially carrying the heart's immense mass. At times, the group was forced to stop, forging a makeshift sled out of the ruins of an old door to drag the crystal across icy patches. Zyros, Hrondr, and Mjorn took turns assisting, though all the dragons were nearly spent. Once, near a rock formation, they glimpsed more of those twisted WIRM-like shapes slithering in the distance, but the creatures kept away, perhaps sensing that this group was no easy prey. Or perhaps they were simply watchers, waiting for a moment of weakness. By dawn, they descended to the beach where the Iron Seeker waited. Relief washed over them to see that the ship still stood intact, sails repaired. Captain Aldries and the crew stared in astonishment at the massive, bundled artifact the dragons helped carry. Before any questions could be asked, Ira explained that it was a critical relic they had come for. "We need to secure it in the hold immediately," she said, voice hoarse from fatigue. "Rowan will erect wards around it." The captain, though stunned, complied. Workers rigged a system of pulleys to lower the heart into the cargo hold. Rowan and Ira supervised each step, layering more runic wards around the canvas. The boat creaked ominously under the weight, but seemed able to bear it. The heart itself glowed dimly, a swirl of pale and dark shapes flickering within, as if troubled by being moved. At last, the group collapsed on the deck, exhausted beyond measure. They had done what they set out to do. But Ira's mind churned with worry. Would the storm they faced before pale in comparison to the challenges of returning home with such a powerful artifact on board? The corruption within the heart could still lash out. She feared another night of swirling red lightning. Yet there was no turning back. Stormhelm was their only hope of cleansing this relic. One way or another, they had to try. Captain Aldrich wasted no time, raising anchor as soon as the tide permitted. The battered Iron Seeker slipped away from Frostmorn Isle, leaving that haunted shore behind. A swirl of dark clouds hovered over the island's peaks, looking like the crest of some sleeping monster. Ira watched it recede, a pit in her stomach. She thought of the Helfirth Shrine's words, "Darkness will claim all if the circle is not restored." They had the heart now, but would that be enough? The return voyage began under uneasy skies. The seas were mercifully calm at first, though the cold bit into every corner of the ship. The dragons roost on deck or hovered nearby, their presence lending a sense of protection. Ira spent what precious energy she had monitoring the artifact below, checking with Rowan regularly to measure any changes in its aura. He reported minor fluctuations, occasionally glimpsing a flicker of the black lines receding or intensifying unpredictably. The wards held, but for how long? At times, when Ira approached the heart, she sensed faint whispers tickling at the edges of her mind. Echoes of the voice they had heard in the Helmfirth Shrine. Memories of Carthandros swirled into these whispers, intensifying her grief. She fought to maintain composure, refusing to let the artifact's murmur unnerve her. She was queen, after all, responsible for everyone on this ship, for the entire North if it came to that. Several days into the journey, they encountered storms again, though none quite so ferocious as the magical maelstrom near the vortex. The crew grew accustomed to the biting sleet and swirling snow flurries. Captain Aldrich steered them along a careful route, often guided by Rowan's magical sense or the vantage of the dragons. They lost precious time skirting ice fields, but better slow than sunk. The nights were cold and restless, but the battered travelers kept hope alive, huddling around small braziers and telling stories of home to pass the time. The presence of the heart remained a constant source of tension. No one dared approach it except Rowan or Ira, and even they did so sparingly. Finally, an afternoon arrived when they sighted the familiar outlines of the northern coast. Shouts of excitement spread across the deck. The watchers in Stormhelm's harbor must have spotted the returning vessel, for horns sounded faintly in the distance, announcing the arrival of the royal expedition. Ira felt an immense wave of relief, tempered by the knowledge that their real challenge might just be beginning. Transporting the heart ashore safely, figuring out a means to cleanse or restore it, all while keeping the corruption contained, these problems weighed on her heavily. As the Iron Seeker glided into the harbor, she saw crowds lining the docks, just as they had when she departed. Word had spread that the Queen had returned. Dragons overhead soared in formation as if welcoming their kin. Ira recognized a few older dragons among them, ambassadors from the northern mountains. They let out echoing calls, uncertain how to interpret the artifact they sensed below. The ship moored and the gangplank lowered. Ira disembarked with Rowan, greeted by a throng of concerned faces. Clan lords, city guards, curious citizens. Among them, Thora stood with a bandaged hand, relief glowing in her eyes. Ira put on a reassuring expression and spoke briefly, praising the bravery of the crew and the dragons and announcing that the expedition had succeeded in recovering an ancient relic vital to the dragon bond. She avoided mentioning its corruption in public. Under heavy guard and magical wards, they moved the Heart of Winter from the ship to a specially prepared vault within Stormhelm's fortress, a chamber lined with runes of containment. Rowan had mobilized the city's best runesmiths in advance, ensuring wards were in place. The artifact, swathed in canvas, glowed with increasing agitation as they carried it through the streets, as though it sensed the presence of so many living souls. When they finally lowered it onto a stone pedestal in the secured vault, Ira sagged with exhaustion but also with a dim flicker of hope. They had brought it home. That night, Ira called a council of her closest advisors, explaining all that had transpired. Frostmorn Isle, the monstrous WIRM, the final retrieval of the heart, and the sense of looming threat. The clan lords listened in rapt silence. Some paled at the mention of corruption. Others voiced concern that meddling with such a relic could invite disaster. But Ira stood firm, stating that the North owed its existence to the Dragon Bond and that if that bond's foundation was imperiled by darkness, they had no choice but to act. Rowan suggested that they begin with a cleansing ritual, combining the efforts of the Archmage Circle, the Dragakeepers, and the clan shamans who retained knowledge of old northern spells. They would gather in the vault with the heart, weaving a protective circle of runes to isolate the corruption and gradually purge it. The dragons themselves might be needed to reinforce the ritual with their innate magic, but the process would be slow and delicate, requiring days or even weeks. Any misstep could shatter the artifact or unleash chaotic energies. Despite the risks, the council agreed to proceed, for the alternative, allowing the heart to remain corrupted, seemed far worse. Preparations began immediately. Messengers rode out to gather wise folk from all corners of the north, while Ira and Rowan oversaw the placement of intricate runic arrays within the vault. The clan lords provided guardians, ensuring that no saboteur or misguided zealot interfered. Rumors flew through Store Helm about what was transpiring in the fortress's depths. Some whispered that the queen had captured the essence of a dragon god. Others said she toyed with forbidden magic. Tension thickened in the air. On the eve of the first ritual attempt, Ira found herself alone in the vault with the heart. She needed a moment of stillness to reconcile her doubts. Torchlight flickered across the crystal's surface, revealing the swirling patterns of corrupted energy within. It was quiet, but Ira could sense a kind of watchfulness. She knelt, placing a hand on the runic circle that surrounded the pedestal. Softly, she spoke to the artifact, not knowing if it could hear her. "I won't let you destroy my people," she murmured. "I also won't abandon the dragons. We will find a way. If Carthandros could hear me now, I know he'd urge me forward." The crystal flickered faintly as though responding to her voice. She felt an ache of longing and regret. Memories of the fierce bond she had shared with Carthandros flooded her mind. That primal connection to draconic life was what had set all this in motion. Now, the future of that bond hung in the balance. Day by day, the cleansing ritual proceeded. Rowan led the Archmage Circle, each cloaked in runic vestments. The Dragon Keepers, including Corin, formed a second ring, calling upon the empathy they shared with the dragons. Several clan shamans chanted in the old tongue, sprinkling powdered minerals and herbs onto the runic lines. Ira stood at the center, hands clasped, her presence linking them all. Overhead, the roof of the vault was open to the sky, thanks to a newly constructed aperture that allowed the dragons to perch on the outer ring. Their roars and trills resonated through the ceremony, blending with the chanting below. At first, the artifact resisted. Gouts of cold energy lashed out, forcing the warding lines to flare. Twice, archmages were knocked unconscious by sudden surges. Ira felt the sting of frostbite on her fingers more than once, but she refused to relent. She poured her will into the circle, summoning her memory of the vow she had made to protect the north. Slowly, painstakingly, the black threads within the crystal began to recede. But the progress was agonizingly slow, and after each session, the participants were left drained. As the days turned to weeks, life in Store Helm continued. Soldiers patrolled the battlements, clan merchants conducted trade with visiting ships, children played in the snowy streets. But beneath the normal rhythms, an undercurrent of dread and anticipation prevailed. Everyone knew that if the queen and her allies failed to cleanse the artifact, the entire kingdom might suffer dire consequences: storms, monstrous WIRMS, or perhaps even worse manifestations of the corruption. Then, on the 13th day of the ritual, matters came to a head. The Archmage Circle assembled before dawn, chanting softly as the skies outside took on the first pale hint of light. Ira took her place in the circle, muscles taut. Corin stood beside her, Jorn perched on the fortress wall above, letting out a low, steady rumble. Gunnar and Daria, too, watched from the perimeter, swords and bows ready in case something went awry. Rowan led the incantation, staff raised, runes shimmering. A hush descended. The moment felt pregnant with possibility, a crossroads of fate. The chanting grew louder, merging with the dragon's calls echoing overhead. Ira felt a surge of energy flow through her, connecting her mind to Rowan, to the shamans, to the Dragon Keepers. They focused that energy upon the heart, forging invisible threads of light that wrapped around the artifact, seeking to expel the black corruption. For a moment, Ira sensed resistance, a malevolent force that writhed within. The black lines inside the crystal throbbed. Then a deafening crack rent the air, and a fissure appeared on the heart's surface. Several archmages cried out in alarm. The wards blazed. Ira felt her heartbeat spike. Was the crystal about to shatter? In desperation, she concentrated all her will, pouring every ounce of her resolve into stabilizing it. She recalled Carthandros's roar, the day she rode him for the first time, the dreams that urged her onward, the courage of her people. She let that flood of memory shape her thoughts into a shield. The crack halted. A brilliant glow erupted from within the crystal, washing the vault in swirling blue-white radiance. The black lines pulsed frantically, then began to wither like dying embers. Rowan's staff flared with an answering light. The shaman's chanting rose to a fever pitch, culminating in a final utterance that Ira felt resonate through her bones. Suddenly, the black corruption tore free in a violent surge, swirling upward like a spectral storm. Gasps and shouts filled the vault as the darkness congealed into a shapeless mass, hovering near the ceiling. Ira caught a glimpse of the swirling mass coalescing into a vague serpentine form, red lightning flickering in its depths, reminiscent of her nightmares. Then, with a shriek that seemed half-wind, half-shadow, the mass burst apart. The shards of darkness scattered into the night sky, leaving a trail of fading sparks. For an instant, no one spoke. The artifact's glow receded to a softer, steady pulse, the fissure in its surface now sealed. Ira, breathing hard, felt tears streak her cheeks from the intensity of it all. Rowan knelt, trembling, staff clutched tight. The shamans sank to their knees, spent. Corin was bent double, hands on his knees, Jorn letting out a worried keen from above. Daria and Gunnar rushed forward, scanning for signs of further threat. Gradually calm returned. The Archmage circle regained composure. Ira approached the heart pounding. The swirling patterns inside were now pure white-blue with no trace of black. A gentle warmth radiated outward, easing the cold ache in her body. She sensed gratitude, a formless but unmistakable feeling of relief emanating from the artifact. Rowan spoke in a trembling voice, "It is cleansed." A wave of awe and elation broke over them. The knights waiting outside the vault felt it too, as if the entire fortress exhaled in a collective sigh. The dragons overhead released a synchronized roar that shook the battlements, a clarion call of triumph echoing across Stormhelm's sky. People in the streets paused to look up, sensing that something profound had happened. Ira closed her eyes, letting herself revel in the moment. For the first time since Carthandros's death, she felt a sense of complete peace and hope. She had done it, she and all the North. Together, they had claimed not just their independence, but the right to shape their future in harmony with dragons. The heart of winter was whole again, its corruption purged. Though she knew challenges would never cease, this victory proved the resilience of her kingdom's spirit. They had reached across centuries of forgotten lore to restore an ancient bond, forging a new chapter in the North's tale. That night, under starry skies swept clear by brisk winds, the North celebrated. Bonfires blazed across Stormhelm's terraces, and minstrels sang triumphant ballads of how the Queen had journeyed to Frostmourne Isle, battled Wirmes, and returned bearing the heart of winter. Dragons circled in majestic arcs above the city, their roars weaving into the night's music. Feasts filled the halls, clan lords, knights, mages, and common folk alike raised cups to toast the success that had seemed impossible mere weeks ago. Ira attended the festivities for a time, receiving congratulations, though she insisted it was a collective achievement. She saw Corin and Jorn in the courtyard, the young dragon nuzzling a cluster of children who giggled and offered scraps of dried meat. Gunnar clapped some men on the back, regaling them with the story of hacking at the Wirm's flank. Daria quietly sipped spiced wine, content to be overshadowed by louder voices but smiling all the same. Rowan leaned against a pillar, eyes half-closed, the lines of exhaustion on his face softened by relief. Eventually, Ira slipped away from the crowds, her footsteps leading her to the fortress walls overlooking the sea. A crisp wind tugged at her cloak. The moonlight silvered the water below. She rested her elbows on the cold stone rampart, reflecting on all that had happened, the Hellfirth Shrine's calling, the perilous expedition, the storms, Frostmourne's monstrous Wirm, the harrowing crossing of the chasm. And finally the cleansing ritual. Through it all, the memory of Carthandros lingered in her heart, a reminder of the bond that had awakened the North's dragons in the first place. She heard a soft rustle of wings behind her. Turning, she saw one of the oldest dragons in the North, Ebonwing, a venerable creature with onyx scales streaked by threads of silver. He perched on the rampart, massive claws gripping the stone, his eyes reflecting the moon's glow. Ira felt a familiar pang. She recalled Carthandros's silhouette in that same spot. Ebonwing bowed his head, letting out a low rumble as if acknowledging her grief and her triumph simultaneously. Ira inclined her head, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. In that silent exchange, she understood that the dragons recognized her efforts not just as a queen, but as someone who had sacrificed and suffered alongside them. The heart of winter might now guide new generations of dragons, ensuring that their resurgence in the North would endure long after she was gone. The bond between human and dragon, tested by war and corruption, was now stronger than ever, sealed in blood, tears, and unyielding devotion. And so the North, once dismissed as a wild and untamed frontier, truly stood as a kingdom of dragons, forging its own destiny beneath the vast northern sky. Freed from the yoke of the southern throne, bolstered by alliances beyond the seas, guided by a queen who bore the memory of a fallen guardian in her soul, the dragon kingdom pressed onward. Challenges still loomed, ambitious rivals, restless magic, the unpredictable storms of life, but the North faced them all with unbreakable resolve. After all, they had proven that even the most impossible tasks, even the deepest shadows, could be overcome by those who dared to believe in the impossible and by the dragons that chose to stand beside them in flight. Thus continued the story of a land once overlooked and misunderstood, where ice and wind battered the mountains, where the nights stretched long and the summers were brief. A legacy burned bright in the hearts of its people. The North had broken off from an empire, become an independent dragon kingdom, and ushered in a new age shaped by the bond of mortal and Wyrm. In the hush of snow-laden forests, in the roar of ocean storms, and in the shimmering glow of dragons high above the ramparts of Stormhelm, one truth rang clear: that freedom, once won, must always be nurtured, and that hope, once kindled, could light the darkest of skies.